Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. On behalf of Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, BIISS, may I take this opportunity to welcome you all to the hybrid seminar on human rights in the 21st century, rhetoric and reality, organized by Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies. Today, we are very much honored to have among us Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, MP, Honorable Speaker, National Parliament of Bangladesh, as the chief guest, and Ms. Nasima Begum, NDC, Chairman, National Human Rights Commission, Bangladesh, as special guest. Distinguished guest, in today's seminar, we have an inaugural session and a working session. At the inaugural session, Major General Muhammad Maqsudur Rahman, OSP, BSP, PSC Director General BIISS will deliver his welcome address. Followed by the welcome address, our special guest, Ms. Nasima Begum, NDC Chairman, National Human Rights Commission, Bangladesh, will deliver her remarks. Thereafter, today's chief guest, Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, MP, Honorable Speaker of National Parliament, will convey her valuable remarks. After the inaugural session, there will be a break of 20 minutes for photo session and tea break. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request the chair of the session, Ambassador Qazi Imtiaz Hussain, to kindly commence the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning to all of you. We are extremely pleased and honored to have amongst us the Honorable Speaker of Bangladesh Parliament, Honorable Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, as the chief guest, and we are delighted to welcome you, Madam Speaker, to our event. We are also very pleased to welcome the chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, Madam Nasima Begum, amongst us. Today, we will have an in-depth discussion and look into human rights realities and rhetorics, and will be honored by the participation of 4 very distinguished panelists. And I acknowledge and express our deep gratitude to Honorable Member of Parliament, Madam Arumadotto, for kindly gracing this occasion. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of other distinguished panelists, Huma Khan from UN system. We have Shuhash from protection officer of UNHCR. We would also have amongst us Professor Mizanur Rahman, the former chairperson of National Human Rights Commission. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, this would be a very exciting event. I can assure you of that, as we look deeper into the realities of human rights and a universal commitment of the entire humanity to ensure the rights and protection and promotion of human rights globally. But before we move on to that, we would like to request our Director General, Major General Maqsudur Rahman, to deliver his welcome address. Major General Rahman, you have the floor. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, Speaker, National Parliament of Bangladesh. Special guest, Her Excellency Nasima Begum, NDC, Chairman, National Human Rights Commission. Ambassador Qazi Imtiaz Hussain, Chairman, BIS, learned panelists, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to you all. On behalf of Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, I welcome you all in today's seminar on human rights in the 21st century, rhetoric and reality. Our heartfelt gratitude to the Honorable Chief Guest and the special guest for gracing today's occasion. Distinguished guest, at this moment, I would like to pay our profound tributes to the memory of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and to all martyrs who laid their life for our nation. While the entire nation is celebrating the birth centenary of the father of the nation and golden jubilee of our independence. Ladies and gentlemen, respect for fundamental human rights is considered to be a key component in the maintenance of peaceful and stable international order. The United Nations Charter, its human rights mandate, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are recognized as the remarkable turning point in global history. Voices from different corners of the world are represented within this instrument, which generally take the form of a written declaration sponsored by the United Nations. These instruments incorporate a wide range of political, social, cultural, and economic rights. However, in all cultural contexts, different issues arise in executing these human rights. Despite the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and special covenants provided for safeguarding the rights of children, women, and the disabled, the human rights are still being violated in many parts of the world. Distinguished guests, several interrelated challenges in 21st century threaten the effective exercise and protection of human rights. The transition to the digital age brings challenges for human rights. Social media platforms are used for spreading disinformation and hate speech that often violates privacy and undermine human rights. The misuse of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, degrades the basic human rights condition. Likewise, the negative impacts of environmental degradation and climate change increase the challenges of basic human rights. Conflict and instability are also threatening the livelihood of the millions across the globe, and the world is witnessing the highest level of displaced persons on record. Moreover, the rise of populism that divides society between us versus them also strikes at the core belief of equality, equal dignity for all. Finally, increasing global income inequality is an antithesis of human rights as it is interlinked with other forms of oppression. Dear participants, while human rights violations are still a significant concern for the world, today some progress has been made in developed and developing countries to protect and advance human rights. For instance, Bangladesh has been participating in United Nations peacekeeping operation and has become one of the key contributors in establishing peace globally. It has successfully participated in 54 UN missions with the highest professional loyalty and courage. The contribution of Bangladesh in UN peacekeeping operation has always been praised by the United Nations and international community. Presently, Bangladesh is hosting more than 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingyas from Myanmar, who experienced years of systematic human rights violation. Bangladesh has kept its commitment under international human rights law by not executing forceful return, that is pushback, of these displaced Rohingyas and provided them shelter, which was denied to them by many other governments. Bangladesh has become an example to the world for her humanity and generosity. Therefore, it is crucial to learn from the best practices of protecting and promoting human rights around the globe to ensure world peace and prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, Against this backdrop, BEES organized this seminar to exchange ideas and thoughts and the experiences of experts, both from developed and developing countries, on human rights related issues. Finally, again, I express my gratitude to the Honorable Chief Guest and the special guest, distinguished panelists, and the learned audience for encouraging us with your kind presence. Thank you very much. Thanks for your presence. Joy Bangla.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Rahman, for your welcome address. May I now turn to our special guest of this event, Madam Nasima Begum, Chairperson, National Human Rights Commission. Madam, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chief Guest, Her Excellency Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, Speaker, National Parliament, Bangladesh, respected Chair, Ambassador Kazi Imtiaz Hussain, BEES, respected Director General, BEES Major General Muhammad Maqsudur Rahman, learned panelists, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to you all. First of all, I pay my deepest tribute to our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and our freedom fighters who sacrifices their life during our liberation war, and also our mother and sister who sacrifices immense during liberation war. It is indeed an honor for me to be speaking in front of this august gathering today. We have convened here to shed light on the status of human rights in the 21st century. Human rights are the fundamental to how we see and structure societies and how we govern our world. It transcends political boundaries and classifications. Preserving human rights is as important in peaceful times as it is in conflict zones. We are witnessing the pandemic in increasing violence in different parts of the world, such as grave violation of human rights in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Conflict are also going in South Sudan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan, Palestine, where the millions of people's human rights are being violated every day. At present, there is no country in the world to claim that it does not have human rights challenges. So there is an urgency of preserving and promoting the human rights of all people all over the world. On this note, I would like to congratulate and heartily thank to the organizer BEES for arranging such a timely seminar on human rights in the 21st century, rhetoric and reality. Learned audience, we all know that human rights are the fundamental rights and freedom that belongs to all people around the world, irrespective of race, color, sex, language, religion, or other status. Every person in the world is equally entitled to human rights without any discrimination and prejudice. These rights cover almost every aspect of human activity, including civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. The concept of human rights is based on the belief that there are some basic organic protection and freedoms that all people should have. All over the world, in both developed and developing countries, there are popular demand for observing human rights. There are calls for deepening and widening the rights of humans, including both greater economic justice and greater political freedom. A concern for the promotion and protection of human rights of all forms is now woven into the fabric of contemporary world affairs. Bangladesh is also no exception to this trend. Our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, within the 10 months of our liberation war, gifted us the Constitution of Bangladesh, which is the supreme law of the land. Article 15 and 26 to 47 of the Constitution of Bangladesh guarantees the fundamental rights of the people of Bangladesh, It contains provisions regarding human rights in different forms and reflects 30 articles of UDHR. In this regard, the National Human Rights Commission of Bangladesh, since its beginning, has been relentless in its effort to protect an inalienable fundamental human rights of all individuals and improve the standard of human rights in the country. The Commission has an extensive mandate. It oversees the human rights situation of the country as a watchdog and plays an advocacy and catalyst role to push forward the human rights agenda. The Commission also acts as a bridge institution that collaboration with CSOs, NGOs, and government, providing a platform for exchanging views and ideas. To look over issues that require special attention, the Commission has formed 12 thematic committees that includes rights of minorities, racial, ethnic, and gender of migrants, of women and children, and even issues relating to climate change, environment and disaster management, business and human rights, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, by nature, human rights are more expensive than any other rights. The last 2 years have been years of human disaster. The curse of the pandemic has taken a toll on the human rights situation globally. This has been further heightened by the increased war and violence in many regions. The world is also witnessing an unprecedented number of people being displaced from their homes. Bangladesh has not gone unaffected. The country has also suffered from the impact of the pandemic and of violence in its neighboring country. The Commission has been concerned about the possible degradation of living conditions of the marginalized population of the country, including the Dalit, third gender, and all other excluded minorities during the pandemic. During COVID-19 pandemic, violence against women and increased globally and nationally, the Commission has long been concerned about level of violence against women and girls in Bangladesh and the lack of a systematic response to this problem. So Commission decided to act decisively by conducting a national inquiry on violence against women and girls with focus on rape. We have consulted NHRIs at the international level who have experience of conducting national inquiries. We have also exchanged views with the former Chief Justice, District and Session Judges, and Nari Shishu Tribunal judges from all 64 districts, Chief Judicial Magistrates, Chief Metropolitan Magistrates. We also conducted a few hearings with CSOs, journalists, lawyers, police, and local administration. We have interviewed perpetrators, survivors, and people to understand the root causes, patterns, the barriers faced by such survivors and their families in receiving support and obtaining justice and remedies, and the psychological aspect of the perpetrators and the people. We have already shared our findings, challenges, and recommendations with the today's chief guest, our honorable speaker, and respective parliamentarians. Distinguished guests, now I would like to share some good practices of our commission. Recently, we have formed District Human Rights Committee and Human Rights Focal Desk Officer are being nominated by the all ministries. Besides, we are providing legal aid to the vulnerable group and creating awareness on human rights. The Commission has been able to raise awareness using virtual platforms such as virtual events, webinars, TV talk shows, newspaper publications, TVC broadcasting, etc. Very recently, we have launched online human rights course. Additionally, we have engaging students by organizing essay competition on human rights and ethical values. Making the NHRC a digitalized institution is underway. With support of UNDP, Bangladesh NHRCB is developing a digital complaint system that will help the NHRCB to manage the complaints and suo motu cases of allegation of human rights violation digitally from route to center and abroad, where our migrant workers also lodges their complaints against violation of human rights. This digital system will enable the institution to record and analyze data-generated reports relating to human rights violations. Now, I would like to mention some praiseworthy performance of Bangladesh in some areas. According to the World Economic Forum, Bangladesh holds the topmost position in ensuring gender equality in South Asia 7 times in a row. The government's attempts to vaccinate all of its population against COVID-19 in a short time is also praiseworthy. Bangladesh is also hosting more than 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingya within its borders, Bangladesh keeps its commitment under international law by not forcing returns. The government also took positive steps by restoring the internet in the camp and allowing them to study under the formal Myanmar curriculum and also vaccinated them. All these initiatives are welcomed by the Commission and the world, but the situation demands to call all concerned to come forward and play a strong role in the process of repatriation of Rohingya to their ancestral land, which is their right. Distinguished guests, the major instrument of international human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights were all signed more than 50 years ago. Since that time, the state of the world has changed tremendously. Each day, we are seeing new advancement in the terms of science and technology. All over the world, the wealth gap is increased. New technologies have created a situation of discrimination between people that was previously unseen. The pandemic is clearly showing the digital divide that exists in many developing countries. The vaccine hoarding by a member of wealthy nation also highlighted the need of ensuring universal rights to basic health. Therefore, to address those challenges, we must broaden our understanding of human rights in the 21st century. It is also important that we change our understanding in regards to who is the guardian of human rights around the world. We must understand that it is not only the government's duty to ensure human rights, rather each of us must be human rights activists and advocates, because rights and responsibility are completely to each other. Right giver and right enjoyer both have responsibilities to implement human rights. Let us we all educate ourselves about fundamental human rights and act together. We must all work to defend not only our own rights, but also those of others. Of course, we play our best role to ensure human rights around the globe. Lastly, I'd like to extend my thanks to the Bees for inviting me to do this seminar. And I thank you all for your patience hearing. Joy Bangla.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission of Bangladesh. Madam, you have not only highlighted the very commendable work the Commission is doing, but what I would personally like to acknowledge that the awareness-raising initiative of the Commission is most laudable, because this will not only create a greater understanding about the human rights issues within the country, but also its upholding and protection. Thank you very much for your valuable remarks for us. But before I request our honorable chief guest to deliver her statement, may I seek the permission of the honorable speaker to make a few comments of my own. Thank you, Madam. Honorable Speaker of the Jatiya সংসদ, Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, Madam Nasima Begum, Chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, Honorable Ms. Arumadato, Member of Parliament, distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you again. 3 days from today, we will be celebrating the 51st National and Independence Day of Bangladesh, an independence earned through the sacrifices of the millions. At this auspicious occasion, I pay my deep homage and tribute to the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the architect of independent Bangladesh. I also pay a deep tribute to 3 million martyrs and over 400,000 girls and women for the supreme sacrifice in our War of Liberation in 1971. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted on the 10th of December 1948, states all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The declaration clearly articulates for the first time in the human history that fundamental human rights are to be universally protected. The UHDR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and its two optional protocols, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, together form the International Bill of Human Rights. UDHR, albeit non-binding in nature, has inspired and paved the way for the adoption of more than 70 human rights treaties. Suffice to say, the declaration has influenced evolution of human rights instruments both at national and global level. However, human rights issues remain much contested till today. Although the concept is nothing new, application, protection, and promotion of these rights are far from universal. There is visible gap between what is preached and what is practiced globally. Distinguished guest, Bangladesh was born out of a long and heroic struggle against injustice, discrimination, and oppression to establish the rights of the people. As a free country, it was only natural for us to commit ourselves to human rights and fundamental freedom for our people. Our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in his maiden speech at the United Nations General Assembly in 1974, in September 1974, had declared, and I quote, "The souls of our martyrs join us in pledging that Bengali nation fully commits itself to the building of a world order in which the aspiration of all men for peace and justice will be realized." End of quote. Bangladesh had envisioned a country that would uphold the principles of equality, inclusivity, democracy, and justice. The principles of Universal Declaration of Human Rights are enshrined in our Constitution. Bangladesh's commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights is thus unflinching and unwavering. It is our constitutional obligation and the commitment to advancing and safeguarding human rights and fundamental freedoms for our people. Bangladesh is a signatory to all major international human rights treaties, including the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and so on. More importantly, these treaties form the basis of our human rights practices in the country. And thus we attach very high importance to the work of Human Rights Council, to which we are a member, in promotion and protection of human rights globally. As our commitment, we have so far submitted in recent times 7 reports to the treaty bodies. Distinguished participants, more than 73 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is a sad reality that injustice and oppression remain present in many parts of the world. The brutal persecution of the Rohingya in Myanmar is a glaring example of decades of human rights violation in their home country. Bangladesh, despite not being a signatory to 1951 Refugee Convention, nor its 67 Protocol, but as a responsible member of the global community, committed to human rights, opened its border and has given shelter to over a million Rohingya minority from Myanmar. It would thus pertinent to raise the question, are human rights and fundamental freedoms, as enshrined in UDHR, are enjoyed universally without discrimination as to race, sex, language, religion, political belief, or opinion? I would simply like to highlight 2 aspects. Perhaps our panelists would like to delve into it when we meet in the next session. The first is the climate change and climate-induced displacement. Environmental factors, including climate change, continues to have dramatic impact on the lives and livelihoods of millions. Natural and man-made environmental disasters have and will force people to migrate. It is estimated that by year 2050, 200 million people will be displaced globally because of climate change. Climate change is an existential threat to humanity. While it is a global crisis, the most vulnerable countries bear the greatest burden, Bangladesh being one of them. A 1 meter rise in level of sea would submerge almost 20% of the country and displace more than 30 million people. Many Pacific Island states such as Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands are already experiencing sea level rise and their existence is endangered. This disaster is not their making. Countries responsible for such environmental catastrophe are not prepared to take the responsibility to address their plight. Call to allow open migration of people displaced by climate change from Kiribati and other Pacific Islands has not received encouraging response. According to a recent report, New Zealand has allowed migration of 75 people from Kiribati to New Zealand every year. Now, the population of Kiribati is some 120,000. And if at this rate, the migration takes place, it will take 1,600 years to migrate the 120,000 odd population. While it's not the sole responsibility of New Zealand to take the entire brunt, it is the responsibility of the entire globe to take the challenge to meet the challenges of the people they are faced in one small island that we are talking about. The other question that vexes our minds is the right of the migrant workers globally. Migrants have always been significant contributors to the socio-economic development of both countries of origin and countries of destination. In many parts of the world, migrants remain vulnerable and experiment discrimination. During the pandemic, migrant workers were disproportionately affected due to their unequal access to healthcare and livelihood opportunities. Distinguished guests, you're aware that International Convention on Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and members of their families, to which we are a party, took 13 years to come into force. This convention constitutes a comprehensive international treaty on the protection of migrants' rights. Unfortunately, of 193 countries, 56 countries have so far signed, ratified this convention. And are we going to be surprised to learn that these 56 countries are the origin countries of the migrant? None of the destination countries, be it in the West, be it in the East, in the South, or in the North, are party to the convention. Now, the obvious question would certainly, are the human rights universal? Are we at all serious about protecting the rights of each and every individual, whatever be their situation? I would perhaps not take much of your time, and we look forward to a very exciting discussion when the panel meets, and on a very vexing question of whether human rights are universal. Is it applied universally, or it is selective, suiting our own convenience? With those words, I would like to thank you all for your patience, and I would also take the opportunity and an honor and privilege to invite our chief guest, Honorable Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, Honorable Speaker of the Bangladesh Jatiya Samsad, to kindly deliver her statement. Madam Speaker, you have.
His Excellency Ambassador Qazi Imtiaz Hussain, Chairman, BIISS, Major General Muhammad Maqsudur Rahman, OSP, BSP, PSC, Director General, BISS, Nasima Begum, NDC, Honorable Chairman, National Human Rights Commission, Bangladesh, distinguished guests, participants, honorable members of parliament, all members of BIISS, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, Shubho Shakal. It is indeed a great pleasure and very special honor for me to join the hybrid seminar on human rights in the 21st century, Rhetoric and Reality, organized by Bangladesh Institute of International and Strategic Studies, BISS. I'm very happy to be here, and as I see from the program that there will be discussions on this by very distinguished panelists, and it will definitely generate a great deal of interest, enthusiasm, and proactive discussion from where we can all learn. This is the month of March, a very significant time in the life of the nation. And this is the month, on 26th of March, we will celebrate our Independence Day. At this auspicious moment, I would like to pay my tribute to our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and all the martyrs who laid down their lives, including our mothers and sisters, for their sacrifice in the emergence of Bangladesh as a sovereign country in the world map. Human rights is a very vast topic, and when I was requested to speak on this, I had to think about it, where to start, where to end, and what would be the succinct points that I could possibly share this morning with all of you. Respect for human rights is an essential tenet for maintenance of peaceful global order. It was in the backdrop of the widespread atrocities committed during the Second World War that fundamental human rights propelled to the center stage. Interwoven throughout the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UN Charter, it spelled out that promotion of universal respect for human rights would be vital in the creation of conditions of stability and well-being of nations. And there was wide consensus on this premise, which actually led to the adoption of Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The Charter, UN Charter, recognizing and reaffirming its faith in its preamble in fundamental human rights, in dignity and worth of human person, in the equal rights of men and women, marked a watershed in the discourse of international human rights. While this is the international human rights framework, the treaty framework, where we find the concept of human rights, let me also touch upon the political philosophy of human rights that constitutes the bedrock of human rights, which even goes much before this. And we have to look at the 16th, 17th, 18th century to see how the concept of human right actually developed through that process. John Locke, a political thinker, conceived the idea of right as natural rights, God-given rights, divine rights in 1689. And he limited the list of rights to very short list: right to life, right to protection of life, liberty, and property. Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 expands the short or the brief list of Locke's rights to a longer list, such as right to free education, public medical care, etc. And today, if we look around, we will see that the concept of human right now actually denotes a much wider arena and includes many more rights than were initially thought or perceived by political thinkers. But there has been criticism of this expansion also. Critics have opined that rights list, if it is so long, then it may risk to become a wish list. It may just become not a claim, not something that you can get when you say that this is my right, but it may be just your desire if we stretch it too far. It is argued that this may lead to claiming rights in order to create them. Human rights exist and it ought to be recognized. This is the crux of the issue. We do not create human rights. Human rights exist and we only can recognize them. Claims to rights are demands that cannot be ignored as request or wish. So there is a clear distinction. When we are saying that this is a fundamental human right, then definitely it is not just a request or a wish list. It is much more than that. Demands for what are human rights have become the unchallengeable justification for a metastasis of entitlement. So there has to be justification for the claim and for that entitlement. And only then we can say that it is a right. To have a right is to have a standing to claim it. If we do not have the standing to claim it, and if nobody respects that claim, then we cannot say that that is a right. Ronald Dworkin, philosopher of law at Oxford University, he explains in his very famous book, Taking Rights Seriously, that is the name of his book, where he explains, individual rights are political trumps held by individuals. Individuals have rights when, for some reason, a collective goal is not a sufficient justification for denying them what they wish as individuals to have or to do. So a collective goal may not be justification to override the claim of an individual. And if that is the case, then that is a right of the individual. Dworkin attributes to individuals rights to whatever they wish. He allows an individual's wish to be denied, but the burden of justifying that denial rests on us. And we must show that the right in question is not in the collective interest. So only in that case, you can deny a right. But other than that, you have to accept it. That is the Dworkin's way of looking at it. Now, the concept of human rights can be traced in Locke's concept of rights that existed in the state of nature, which he called the natural rights. Locke's reasoning was right to life, liberty, property existed in the state of nature. And that is what also we find in when we are talking about human rights, that it already exists. We don't create it, the state doesn't create it, the government doesn't give it to us. We already inherit that right. And Locke did not have, and Locke says that these rights, the rights which were generated, which already existed in the state of nature, did not have the protection of the government, nor were they created by the government. So Locke called them natural and said they were instituted by God, the creator of nature. But then again, there was a big criticism of Locke's discourse by Bentham, who never believed in natural rights, and he believed in positive empirical rights in which are more evident, you can find and back it by evidence. However, those are the political discourse and different views from which we can trace how the rights have emerged. But this notion finds resemblance with the concept of human rights as we understand it. These human rights are the inherent, inalienable, and indivisible rights of all human beings. Human beings inherit these rights by virtue of being born as human, irrespective of nationality, sex, place of residence, ethnic origin, language, etc. So the fact that you are born as a human being, you come with these rights, the right to life, the right to liberty, and many more. And these are the rights that nobody can take away from you without reasonable justification or grounds. Human rights are not absolute. They can be taken away, but it has to be subjected to reasonable restrictions. And every state is under an obligation to respect, promote, and uphold these rights. So that is the basic concept from where we can have an idea about what we mean when we talk about human rights. Now, in the context of our own country, Bangladesh, our constitution, which was promulgated in 1972 by our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, is a sterling example, which is the supreme law of the land, and it upholds human rights. Fundamental human rights are enshrined in Part 3 of our constitution. And as you know, that on his return to Bangladesh after independence for the first time on 10 January 1972, father of the nation, on 11 January, he declared the proclamation, the constitutional order under which the process of writing a constitution for an independent country started. So that itself signifies how much importance our father of the nation, Bangabandhu, attached to having a constitution for an independent country. And within the shortest possible time, within a time frame of 9 months, on 4th of November, 1972, Bangladesh Constitution was passed in the Ganaparishad. And 16 December 1972, it came into force within a very short time. And if you go through the constitution, it is absolutely clear that Bangladesh is committed in promoting and protecting human rights. Our constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, Article 7, which is the pole star of our constitution, where it says that all power of the republic belong to the people. So people are sovereign and all power emanates or generates from the people, which is exercised by the representatives who are elected to the parliament. So Bangladesh Constitution upholds and cherishes the respect for human rights. Bangladesh has given shelter to 1.1 million Rohingya people whose human rights were gravely violated in their own country, Myanmar. And we are still having the Rohingya people in our country. And this is also another example of the respect for human rights that Bangladesh has been able to show to the world. Our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina spent maximum years of her life in her struggle for restoring democracy and upholding the rule of law and bringing back the constitutional rule again in Bangladesh. And therefore, she is an ardent promoter of human rights beyond question. Now, let me just conclude with today's topic, rights, human rights, whether rhetoric or reality. An analysis of impact of fundamental human rights is likely to tilt the argument in favor of rhetoric, as rhetoric serves as a great tool for the politics to bring about or create a common terrain for diverse cultural, diverse culture of all people. So when human rights are serving as a rhetoric, it serves the political purpose of bringing about convergence between the diverse culture of all people, because we live in a diverse world and we want to have an inclusive society. So in 21st century, human rights must also be seen as instrumental in ensuring social stability, social justice, building block for upholding rule of law and good governance. Respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms must be seen as cardinal principle of promoting equality, gender equality, inclusiveness, and sustainable socio-economic development across diverse global societies. So it is very important to ensure respect for human rights, because to attain the other goals, we have to ensure respect for human rights. Thus, I want to emphasize human rights in 21st century is a rhetoric as much as a reality. Human rights as rhetoric can serve as an important tool in converging common grounds in diverse global order. It can be responsive in finding common grounds in diverse culture. Human rights in reality can be effective in maintaining internal peace, international peace and order. I want to conclude with one of favorite quotes of mine, which is of Robert Kennedy. Quote, "Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up, out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice," unquote. So let us then apply this principle in any situation of violation of human rights to promote and uphold human rights for a peaceful international order. In my thesis on right to life, in my PhD, I ended with a quote which is very close to my heart, and I want to share that quote with you. Quote, "It is justice, not charity, that is wanting in the world," unquote. Thank you for your patience. May Bangladesh live forever. Joy Bangla.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much for.
বক্তৃতা একটা দিলাম আমার একজন শিক্ষকের সামনে, কাজেই এখনো একটু ভয় লাগছে মনে মনে। ডক্টর মিজান আমাকে পড়িয়েছেন, আমি ওনার ছাত্রী ছিলাম ল ডিপার্টমেন্টে।
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think our inaugural session couldn't have ended without the quote that is very close to your heart and you made. I think that encapsulates the spirit of human rights, and that encapsulates our aspiration of upholding the rights and ensuring that each and every individual at home, abroad, globally enjoys the fruit of human rights and enjoys life. With those words, we would like to finish and end our inaugural session. But before that, we like to express our profound gratitude to the Honorable Speaker of Bangladesh Parliament, Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, for her valuable time and sharing with us her thoughts on human rights. Judy would like to thank the chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, Madam Nasima Begum, NDC. We also like to thank our participants, and we take a short break before we convene again for a working session, and then I personally look forward to that very much. Before I end, as honorable speaker had acknowledged, Professor Mizanur Rahman, we would also like to welcome you to our event, and I will look forward to listening to you in the next session. With that, and with the permission of the honorable speaker, we conclude the inaugural session. Thank you very much.
Respected chief guest, special guest speaker of the of today's seminar, and BIS faculty members are kindly requested to join for a photo session. It is arranged in the BIS premises. And rest of the guests are requested to join the light refreshment. It is
Make it because of some inconvenience that she is faced certainly in the morning. So the responsibility has fallen on a person who hardly has any understanding of human rights, and a very few understanding of how to moderate session. But nevertheless, I'll make a very poor attempt on passing the floor essentially from to 4 distinguished speakers and presenters that we have, and we'll start our presentation with Madam Huma Khan, Senior Human Rights Advisor for UN System, which will be followed by a presentation from Professor Mizanur Rahman. We'll also listen to Shuha Shavosti, and finally we will have our Honorable Member of Parliament, Aroma Dotto, to make her presentation. We are running late. I had in the meantime jotted down a few things, but it would be much more interesting to listen to our distinguished panelists. And with that, may I request Madam Huma Khan, Senior Human Rights Advisor for UN Rescore in Bangladesh, to kindly take the floor and make her presentation. May I also just highlight that we are streaming online on Facebook, and once the sessions presentations are over, we'll be listening and taking questions and queries from our participants who have joined us online. Madam Huma Khan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I feel like I have to fill into very big shoes, because speakers before this panel had highlighted really important and conceptual issues and had given quite strong examples as well. I will try to do my best to fit into those shoes that are necessarily not my size. So, Honorable Speaker of the Parliament, Honorable Chairperson, National Human Rights Commission, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I work here as the Senior Human Rights Advisor, and I would try to go back to a little bit of the history, because this question and the seminar, the question it addresses is a very pertinent question in today's reality. However, we need to see why we needed human rights to begin with. And as highlighted earlier, it was at the backdrop of Second World War, the atrocities that were committed, and the globe that was coming together of different continents meeting each other more frequently. That was the time where we also realized that we needed a set of framework that everybody would be abiding by. Before that, of course, societies had their frameworks based on their culture, based on their religion, and based on the value system that different parts of the globe followed. Human rights principles that are enshrined in Universal Declaration tried to bring these values together to make something that would suit everyone, more or less. And I mean, noting that at that time when the resolution was adopted, not all countries were independent and not all countries necessarily were represented. However, it has been a long journey since that time, and we have grown. Different conventions have come in at different times, according to the need, according to the development of the discourse. Some of the questions obviously still remain, like the issue of inalienability of human rights, whether they can be removed from an individual or not, and if at all, in what kind of circumstances that is allowed and how extreme should those circumstances be. There's also the question of culture that keeps coming in, that how human rights adapt to different cultures, and there are people who feel that not necessarily the principles that are there address their issues and values, and the framework has been developing with these developments as well. So it's not a static framework. What we had at the time of the declaration is not necessarily the only reality today, and there is a huge discourse around women's rights, which was not there at that time. We have a huge discourse on rights of transgender people, now migration, climate change. All of this is developing. So it's a framework that is not static and it is developing. I would like to note here an addition that Bangladesh made itself to this framework, which is the right of language, linguistic right, which was the most profoundly pronounced by Bangladesh, and we celebrate that as the Language Day as well. Now, when we look at the human rights discourse, it's a conceptual framework, and I will keep it very practical. We use a conceptual framework to obviously our advantage, and we interpret it often the way we understand it. So when we look at the way international human rights discourse functions, we have to understand that it is primarily embedded in the member states. So member states are the ones who decide, which Bangladesh being one of them, member states are the ones who decide which convention will be there. Member states are the ones who decide to give a mandate to the functioning body of the UN to implement something or not. And it is obviously member states are not homogeneous. There are a lot of differences. There are political considerations. There are economic considerations, which also guide often many member states not necessarily always keeping human rights at the top of their agenda. And that rightly brings us to this question about how relevant are human rights today. This question is important to dwell upon, and I'm happy that we are doing that here, because if we take it out, which framework is our aspirational framework and which framework defines our value systems? Obviously, I understand Bangladesh has a large Muslim population and the religion itself defines that. But then what about those who don't belong to that religion? Then there are people who speak the same language and form a group, but then what about those who don't speak that language? So therefore, a set of aspirational rights, or at least a framework in front of us that unites us. That's why we are called United Nations, because human rights came as the uniting factor to bring the whole world together. So the principles that would bring us together were basically these principles. However, principles and realities always have a gap in between, and that gap has been discussed in the previous session as well. And there is no doubt about that gap at this stage. I wanted to address three key issues that were raised at the beginning. The use of digital technology and human rights. That is something that the world obviously has seen a sudden revolution, and most of us don't know how to handle this digital outpour of comments, of writing things, of also infringing upon other people's rights, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, hate speech, campaigns against an individual. All this is a reality. And obviously the states that have to ensure law and order have to take certain measures to make sure that these are regulated. The platforms that provide this space also have an obligation to provide a certain code of conduct, to provide a certain methodology which people cannot cross. Some of these platforms have this code of conduct, but they're not strictly implemented. And the other part of it is the user. What does the user know about rights and responsibilities? What does the user know? Because for many, it's also a big opportunity. People who were never able to express themselves anywhere now suddenly have this platform where they could express themselves, and without knowledge, they are doing it in many ways that are not necessarily appropriate. Now, the question is whether criminalizing this behavior is the answer. We have different opinions on this. Many countries have gone ahead and criminalized digital expressions. But is this the only way to control that? Because it's a big addition to freedom of speech, expression, opinion. It also allows people to learn much more. The newer generation, the younger generation, to me, they're much more educated, like they know much more than I did at that age. So do we want to take away, do we want to control people's minds, or do we want to allow them to use this technology in a responsible manner? And I think most of us would agree in this room that using the technology to its advantage, it's a huge asset. How do we try to control what is not right is also by educating. Do we have digital education in schools? Do we have digital education at universities? Do people know what is the code of conduct for acting upon a digital platform? Because putting people behind bars will not necessarily resolve the whole issue. So apart from the issue of criminalization, prosecution, I also encourage that we look at a code of conduct and we see how we educate our citizens, our young generation, to abide by those code of conduct. And our education system has a huge role to play in that. And that's one view, obviously, that I'm representing here. And I would like the participants to definitely see whether this makes sense for them or not. The second issue that comes is a relevant one, which was raised by the previous speakers, that it's not only the responsibility of the state. Agreed. And in many states, there are businesses that are bigger than states. They're more powerful. They run the countries, they form the governments, they also sometimes are able to remove governments. How are they held responsible? Because climate change is a connected question to businesses and code of conduct and regulation of businesses. A lot of these, the disaster of climate change is also linked because big businesses act in irresponsible manner, and then obviously a huge population has to suffer. Some states are able to regulate that, but economic interests have taken over so overwhelmingly that often we see reluctance or lack of capacity from states to be able to control these big businesses. And that is an area that is still developing in the human rights field. We have a code of conduct for responsible business. We have a whole concept of business and human rights. There are big businesses who abide by this code of conduct. It's a voluntary pledge. Like all the conventions are a voluntary pledge for the state to make, and then state binds itself. Similarly, we also working on having businesses abide by a certain code of conduct, which puts certain responsibilities on them. And it is not only corporate social responsibility, which just spends money. So it's not about you go and implement a project in an area, displace thousands of people, and then you run some charity activities. It's about respecting people's rights in that area and have a rights-based approach, like the governments are supposed to have a rights-based approach, expected, and many do. In the same way, the businesses need to have more rights-based approach. And that's a very, very challenging task, it's a very nascent stage. Interestingly, South Asia Business and Human Rights Forum is taking place in Bangladesh end of this month, 28th to 30th, and we will see how Bangladeshi business community will hopefully come forward and take this forward. But that is one big area because it's directly linked to climate change. Now, when we come to climate change, there have also been developments on the climate change front. I would thank Bangladesh for pushing for a special rapporteur on environmental rights, which was approved by Human Rights Council last year. And now we should have a special rapporteur looking at environmental rights. But that is obviously not sufficient because, as pointed out earlier, there is a big gap between the developed and the developing countries, and countries taking their role and responsibilities more seriously. We do not have any binding convention at the moment, and it would be a very, very difficult one. But it's not that there are no discussions. I mean, COP26 was a discussion. There were commitments and pledges made by many countries. But these are obviously long-term processes. Human rights itself is not something that is achieved in a day or two or in decades. How we use the framework is up to us. And if it is made into only a political tool, then of course it can become only a matter of words which member states can use against each other. Or some states also decide to use them against their own citizens. But at the same time, if we look at the values themselves, then we have a lot to do, and there is a lot of opportunity, because we need to remember that before this framework existed, it was very, very difficult to define these concepts that come naturally to us, like equality, like discrimination. We are able to recognize and express them because we have this terminology, which is a growing and sharedly owned terminology, a shared framework for everyone in this world. And that's why it is important for everyone to own this framework and to develop it. It does not belong to any particular set of nations. It does not belong necessarily to any particular race. And I would say that often there is this feeling amongst people from Global South, including myself. One feels that this is something that is primarily a Western value. There are many people who have this concept that human rights are a Western value. But I know that a lot of people in this room are practicing Muslims. Where did you read about equality the first time, or justice? Perhaps not in your school book, but when you started your religious education. I'm a Muslim, so I know that better. But every religion has these concepts. So we need to also look back and see where they belong to us and not look at it as an external idea. It's not. It has grown with all of us. As I just remembered two big contributions that Bangladesh made, but there are many more. So looking at it as an external concept, we will not be able to own it. So I just want to say that it's a concept, it's a shared concept where Global South has, in fact, contributed more than the Global North. So we need to be proud for our contributions to this framework and for helping this framework grow and own it and implement it. It's for all of us to implement it. I just wanted to address this here. I know that we are short of time, and I would also definitely like to hear what others think. So I would like to stop here and wait for other distinguished panelists to address this subject. Thank you very much. And thank you for the organizers to give me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khan, and thank you for saving us a few minutes of your allotted time and giving the opportunity for others to take up your time. And then you certainly have highlighted, finished with the thought that the human rights are not something external. We also own it, and unless we believe that this right is universal, its application, its ownership, if not taken, then its implementation would certainly be much shorter than what we would like to see. I now have the privilege of requesting Professor Mizanur Rahman. Professor Mizanur Rahman do not require any introduction. He in himself is a very known academician, and we have seen him chairing the National Human Rights Commission. So not only as an academician, but also as a practitioner of human rights, he has a very respectable position in our society. And we'd like to thank you for coming and addressing it, and request you to kindly take the floor. I suppose I'll just broadly indicate the allotted time for all speakers are 15 minutes, but perhaps if you need more, the time that we have saved from, or Madam Huma has given us, you may wish to also utilize that. Professor Rahman, you have the floor.
Thank you. Very esteemed moderator, my respected co-panelists, the honorable speaker, Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, the organizers, the Director General of BIISS, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, please allow me to express my very sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me and making a presentation and share some of my thoughts on human rights with this August gathering. তবে যেহেতু মাস্টার মানুষ, একটু মাস্টারি দিয়ে শুরু করি, এবং মাস্টারি দিয়ে শুরু করছি এই কারণে যে আমি দেখছি যে অনেক ছাত্রছাত্রী এই অডিটোরিয়ামে রয়েছে এই পর্যন্ত। Lest you don't have any wrong idea, কোনো ভুল ধারণা যেন সৃষ্টি না হয়, একটা জিনিস মনে রাখতে হবে যে আমাদের যে সমস্ত কনস্টিটিউশনাল অর্গান আছে বা ইনস্টিটিউশন আছে, সেগুলোর প্রকৃত নাম কিন্তু আমাদের সংবিধানে উল্লেখ করা আছে। আমাদের সংবিধানে আমরা তাই বলি জাতীয় সংসদ, আমরা কিন্তু কখনোই বলি না ন্যাশনাল পার্লামেন্ট। ইংরেজিতে বলতে গেলে বলতে হবে হাউস অফ দি নেশন। সুতরাং ন্যাশনাল পার্লামেন্ট, দিস ইজ রং, এটা কখনোই উচিত নয় এভাবে আমাদের জাতীয় সংসদকে অভিহিত করা। So that's a bit of teaching as a teacher, and now let me switch over to my presentation. As you can see, in the twilight of human rights law, একটু ওদের প্রভোকেটিভ হয়ে গেল আমার টপিকটা, বাট প্রবাবলি আমি ডেলিবারেটলি এটাকে একটু আমি provocative করার চেষ্টা করেছি, so that the young minds can delve more deeply into the issues that we will be dealing with, we'll be talking about, so that you can form your informed opinion on the discourse on human rights and on the specific issues that we'll be touching upon. Next one, please. The next. Now the presentation focus. Probably you see যে আমি কথাগুলো খুব স্পষ্ট করে এখানে বলবার চেষ্টা করেছি যে is social justice merely a soothing legal opium or illusory word of words only? Where is the place of human rights in our logo of social justice? Is social justice on the agenda of action today? How far talk of social justice is legitimate to improve human condition, hence human rights? The next. এখানে এই কথাগুলো বলতে গেলে there are certain common observations যেগুলো probably I would even term it as common wisdom. সেটা একটি হচ্ছে যে human beings everywhere demand a realization of diverse values to ensure their individual and collective well-being. এই কথাটি আমাদের মাননীয় স্পিকার তার ইন্ট্রোডাক্টরি লেকচারে কিন্তু খুব সুন্দর করে the the tension between the individual and the collective in the form of human rights, এই প্রশ্নটি অনুত্থাপন করেছেন, সেই কথাটাই কিন্তু আমি এখানে একটু ভিন্নভাবে বলবার চেষ্টা করেছি। সেকেন্ডলি, these demands, যেগুলো আমরা হিউম্যান রাইটস বলছি, whether you talk it as aspirations or you're taking it as claims, the legitimate claims or demands or rights, however we call them, these demands are painfully frustrated by social as well as natural forces.
It can be at the second.
By social, I mean human-made or natural forces. যদি calamity হয়, তাহলে obviously that leads to disastrous consequences, resulting in exploitation, expression, oppression, persecution, and other forms of oppression. When you talk of social justice, establishment of a society based on the, and please, I reiterate, based on the rule of law, human rights, equality, liberty, indeed comes part in it. এই কনসেপ্টগুলো বাদ দিয়ে কিন্তু we cannot talk of social justice or a society based on human rights, because that would be merely a hollow discussion leading এখন the next one please. এই যে কনসেপ্ট অফ হিউম্যান রাইটস এর কথা আমরা বলছি, এটি কিন্তু আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট আজকে she has made my task much more easier, কারণ ছোট্ট একটা বক্তৃতার ভিতরে উনি আসল কথাগুলো কিন্তু আমাদেরকে বলে গেছেন। আমরা 1945 থেকে মোটামুটি আমরা হিউম্যান রাইটস শব্দের সঙ্গে আমরা পরিচিত হচ্ছি, হাউ দি চার্টার অফ দ্য ইউনাইটেড নেশনস রিলেটস টু দ্যাট, এবং উনি যেটা বলেছেন যে উই ইনহেরিটেড ফ্রম দি আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং অফ ন্যাচারাল ল, ফ্রম দ্য ন্যাচারাল রাইটস। এই কথাগুলো খুবই স্পষ্ট, এগুলো কিন্তু আমাদের জানা দরকার এই জন্যই, বিকজ universal working forces pervades all creation and human conduct, therefore should be judged according to and brought into harmony with the law of nature. এই যে ল অফ নেচার, নেক্সট এটা দেখেন একটু, দ্য ল অফ নেচার, এটাকে আমি আর ব্যাখ্যা করব না, কিন্তু এই যে অ্যান্টিগনি, এই অ্যান্টিগনি যখন ছেলে যখন বিদ্রোহ ঘোষণা করলো বাবার বিরুদ্ধে এবং ছেলে যুদ্ধে পরাজিত হলো, তখন বাবা যখন বলছে যে আমার পুত্র বিদ্রোহী সন্তান, যেটা হয়তো আমাদের এই উপমহাদেশের ইতিহাসে আমরা সবসময় দেখেছি যে মোগল সম্রাটদের বিরুদ্ধে কিভাবে তার সন্তানরা বিদ্রোহ করেছে এবং তাদের পরিণতি আমরা কি দেখেছি, সে একই পরিণতি। এবং বাবা বলছেন যেহেতু তুমি সন্তান, তাই ইউ উইল নট বি বারিড অন দিস স্টেট, অন দিস ল্যান্ড, তোমার এই অধিকার, আমি তোমাকে এখানে তোমার সমাহিত করার তোমার কোনো অধিকার নেই। তখন অ্যান্টিগনি দ্য সিস্টার, এখানেই তো নারীদের মূল, এখানেই নারীদের ভূমিকা, এখানে নারীরা পুরুষের চেয়ে অনেক অনেক এগিয়ে। নারী এসে তখন এই অ্যান্টিগনি এসে বলছে, বাট ফাদার, তোমার মুখের কথা আইন হতে পারে, বাট ডোন্ট ফরগেট দেয়ার ইজ ল ইভেন হায়ার, more stronger, more powerful than your made laws, and that's the law of nature. এবং সেই ল অফ নেচারের কথা যদি আমরা মনে করি, then you cannot deny my brother to be buried on this soil in his motherland. This is what is law of nature. কত শক্তিশালী! শুধু আমরা এই নেচার থেকে কিন্তু আমরা ইনহেরিট করছি আমাদের our perception and concept of human rights. The next one, যে কথা আমাদের বলেছি যে আমি এগুলো যাব না, খুব যে এই ডিউটিজ এবং রাইটস এর কথা এবং ইটারনাল ইনএলিয়েনেবল এগুলোর কথা আমরা যাব না। নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। আচ্ছা, এখানে আমাদের আবারও আমাদের চিফ জাস্টিস এই লকের কথা খুব ভালোভাবে বলেছেন, এবং এগেইন she has done justice to our presentation and she has justice to me as a former teacher also, because আমার কাজগুলো এত সহজ করে দিয়েছেন উনি যে এই জন লকের, এবং এখানে দেখুন ভোল্টেয়ার এবং রুসো একই টোনে কি বলছেন যে certain rights self-evidently pertain to individuals as human beings. Chief among them are right to life, liberty, and property. এটা মনে হয়েছে, কিন্তু আমরা কিন্তু এখনো মনে করছি these are natural rights. আজকে যদি if you look at the West, if you look at the United States of America, what do you see? আমার ইচ্ছে হলো, ও তুমি রুশ, তোমার সব দামি ইয়াট আমি এখানে কবজা করে নেব, এটা আমি জাতীয়করণ করে ফেললাম, আমি এটা এক্সপ্রোপ্রিয়েট করলাম, তোমার কোনো রাইট টু ওনারশিপ, রাইট টু প্রপার্টি কিছুই থাকবে না, আমার ইচ্ছা হয়েছে রাইট টু প্রপার্টিকে আমি বিসর্জন দিয়ে দিয়েছি। What a hypocrisy, what a duality, what a nonsensical attitude toward human rights. আজকে যে হিউম্যান রাইটস নিয়ে এত কথা বলে, had they had minimum faith in human rights, তাহলে এই কথাগুলো তো বলার কথা না, এই কথাগুলো আমাদের আজকে শুনবার কথাও নয়। But this is the world that we live in. And যার জন্য আমি বলছি, is it the twilight of human rights law? Are we at the end of the tunnel? And now we are entering into a new world order where new things will be defined in a new way. দেখুন, next one, যে আমরা কিন্তু সবসময় যেটা করেছি যে যদি আমরা নেচার থেকে পেয়ে থাকি, what do? We have decided as a matter of social contract যে আমরা আমাদের অধিকারগুলো we have surrendered to the state. What we have surrendered? Not the rights themselves. Surrendered to the state to enforce the rights, to recognize these rights. So it's just, the task, the duty of the state is to enforce, is to promote, is to protect these rights. Because the state is not the giver of these rights. এবং সেই, আমাদের বিখ্যাত সেই থমাস জেফারসনের সেই উক্তি, free people claiming their rights as derived from the law of nature and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. সুতরাং কোন প্রেসিডেন্ট, কোন প্রাইম মিনিস্টার, কোন সরকার, কেউ এই অধিকারগুলো একজন নগণ্য অসহায় একটা ব্যক্তিকে যে রাস্তার ধারে পড়ে আছে তাকেও দেবার অধিকার বা ক্ষমতা সবচেয়ে পরাক্রমশালী প্রেসিডেন্টেরও নাই। কেননা এগুলো হচ্ছে প্রকৃতির দান। সেই প্রকৃতিকে আপনি যেভাবেই ব্যাখ্যা করুন না কেন, যদি আপনি ধর্মে বিশ্বাস করেন আপনি বলবেন প্রকৃতি হচ্ছে সৃষ্টিকর্তা, দ্য গড, আল্লাহ। আর যদি আপনি নাস্তিক হন তাহলে আপনি বলবেন প্রকৃতি হচ্ছে দ্য অ্যাবসলিউট আইডিয়া, প্রকৃতি হচ্ছে দ্য সারাউন্ডিং। এটা হতে পারে পানি, এটা হতে পারে অগ্নি, এটা হতে পারে বাতাস, এটা হতে পারে মাটি, যে কোনো কিছু থেকেই যেখানে জীবনে উৎপন্ন হয়েছে, উৎসারিত হয়েছে, সেটি থেকেই আমরা এগুলো পেয়েছি। সো হোয়াট এভার ইউ বিলিভ। এখন দেখুন, নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। আমরা এই ডকুমেন্টগুলো কিন্তু আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট আজকে সকালে আমাদের বলে গেছেন যে আমাদের এই এনলাইটমেন্ট, পিরিয়ড অফ এনলাইটমেন্টের মধ্যে আমাদের যিনি বলেছেন 16, 17, 18 সেঞ্চুরি ডিফারেন্ট ডকুমেন্টস এর কথা বলেছেন। যখন আমরা দেখেছি যে এগুলো মাঝে মাঝেই আমাদের মাঝে এসছে, হিউম্যান সিভিলাইজেশনের নাড়া দিয়েছে, in some way or other they have been crystallized into certain formulations. তার মধ্যে আমরা দেখি the Declaration of Independence, American Declaration of Independence 1776, এবং এই কথাটা আমার খুব প্রিয় কথা, যেহেতু কবিতার মতো মনে হয় কথাগুলো পড়তে। সেই কবিতার কথাগুলো হচ্ছে, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. আমার ভাবতেও ভালো লাগে যে আমেরিকানরা প্রপার্টির কথা ভুলে গিয়ে প্রপার্টিকে উল্লেখ না করে সেখানে pursuit of happiness কে উল্লেখ করেছিল। What a tremendous achievement for human civilization! কতদূর এগিয়ে নিয়ে গেছে। এবং আজকে if you just think of pursuit of happiness, কি নেই। আমার আজকে আমাদের চেয়ারপারসন অফ দ্য ন্যাশনাল হিউম্যান রাইটস কমিশন এখানে আছেন, ওনার যদি সুন্দর একটা শাড়ি যদি হতো, দ্যাট কুড হ্যাভ বিন পার্ট অফ হ্যাপিনেস। ডক্টর শিরিন শারমিন চৌধুরী বলছিলেন যে গুচ্ছ গ্রাম করে দিচ্ছে, যে মানুষের কোনো বাড়ি ছিল না, মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী তাকে একটা ঘর করে দিচ্ছে। Well, that's a pursuit of happiness. আমাদেরকে গল্প ছলে বলছিলেন যে সেই যে মানুষের কোনো কিছুই ছিল না, সেখানে গ্রামে এখন ছোট বাড়ি পেয়েছে, সেখানে সে রাইস কুকারে রাইস রান্না করে প্রধানমন্ত্রীকে তার ছবি পাঠিয়েছে, এবং প্রধানমন্ত্রী মাননীয় প্রধান সেটা সবার সঙ্গে শেয়ার করছেন, বিকজ দি প্রাইম মিনিস্টার ইজ ফিলিং হ্যাপি। জানি এটাই তো হচ্ছে সুখ, এটাই হচ্ছে শান্তি, এবং দ্যাট ইজ অলসো ইন পারসিউট অফ হ্যাপিনেস। এভরিথিং এন্ড এনিথিং ক্যান বি অ্যাকোমোডেটেড আন্ডার দ্য রুব্রিক ইন পারসিউট অফ হ্যাপিনেস, এবং সেই কাজটি আমরা দেখছি হিউম্যান রাইটসে আমাদের এখানে আছে। এই যে 1789 এর ফ্রেঞ্চ রেভলিউশনের পরের যে সবচেয়ে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ডকুমেন্ট, ডিক্লারেশন অফ দ্য রাইটস অফ ম্যান এন্ড সিটিজেন, সেখানে তার কি বলছে যে মেন আর born and remain free and equal in rights। একদমই খুব ছোট্ট একটা বাক্য, কিন্তু সেই বাক্য ইট স্পিক্স ভলিউমস। আচ্ছা, তাহলে আমরা এখন দেখুন এই অ্যাকসেপ্টেড যে পোস্টুলেটস অফ ইউর নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। আমরা যে সমস্ত নিয়ে কোনো আমাদের তর্ক নেই হিউম্যান রাইটস এর ক্ষেত্রে, সেগুলো হচ্ছে হিউম্যান রাইট ইজ আন্ডারস্টুড টু রিপ্রেজেন্ট ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল অ্যান্ড গ্রুপ ডিমান্ডস। একটু টেনশন মাঝে মাঝে হয়, আমাদের ডিবেট হতে পারে, বাট অ্যাট দ্য এন্ড অফ দ্য ডে দিস ইজ হোয়াট উই আর। বিকজ আমরা যেমন রাইট মনে করুন যে রাইট টু প্রপার্টির কথা বলি, আমার ফ্রিডম অফ মুভমেন্টের কথা বলি, ঠিক তেমনি রাইট টু পিস, right to sustainable environment, right to a sustainable climate. So these are all collective rights. So individual as well as collective demands and rights, it is subsumed accommodated under human rights. Human rights refer to a wide continuum of values, value claims ranging from the most justifiable to the most aspirational. Which in pursuit of happiness, এর মধ্যে অনেক কিছু চলে আসবে যেগুলো এই মুহূর্তে আমার প্রোটেক্ট করা প্রমোট করা সম্ভব নয়, বাট অ্যাট লিস্ট দিস ইজ সাম অ্যাসপিরেশনাল ক্লেইমস, অ্যাসপিরেশনাল ডিমান্ড। আমার স্বপ্ন রয়েছে, আমার স্বাদ আছে, আমরা বলি যে আমার স্বাদ আছে কিন্তু সাধ্য নেই। এই স্বাদ এবং সাধ্যে ঠিক আছে এখন নেই আমার সাধ্য, কিন্তু সাধ্য তো হচ্ছে। কে কল্পনা করেছিল বাংলাদেশে কোনো একদিন যে বাংলাদেশের মতো একটি দরিদ্র রাষ্ট্র, একটা মানে তলাবিহীন ঝুড়ি, সে কিনা নিজের অর্থায়নে পদ্মা সেতুর মতো একটা সেতু নির্মাণ করতে পারবে? কে কল্পনা করেছিল? Most of you were not born in 1971, but I was a school going kid in 1971. I saw this country in 1971 when it was liberated. I could have never thought কি সর্ব এখন কি আমাদের কি কয়েক হাজার লাখ কোটি টাকা আমাদের ন্যাশনাল বাজেট। আমি সবসময় অঙ্কে কাঁচা ছিলাম, আমার মাথার মধ্যে ঢুকে না যে এত হাজার লাখ কোটি টাকার বাজেট, এটা আবার কি হবে? আমাদের অর্থমন্ত্রী এগুলো হিসেব টিসেব করেন, কিভাবে করেন আমি বুঝতেও পারি না। এবং সবসময় আমি প্রফেসর আবুল বারকাতকে ফোন করি, বরকত কি ব্যাপার এটা বুঝতে পারছি না। I take refuge in Professor Abul Barkat. But this is what Bangladesh has become. And this is what is আমাদের সাধ্যটা কিভাবে ক্রমান্বয়ে এবং দ্রুত গতিতে বৃদ্ধি পাচ্ছে। You see, human rights are universal. আমি একটা কথা বলি এখানে, including all, even rights of someone who is still not born. একজন unborn childerও rights, human rights হিসেবে আজকে স্বীকৃত। That is the kind of development in human rights discourse that we are witnessing. Most assertions of human rights are qualified by the limitation that the rights of any particular individual or group in any particular instance are restricted as much as is necessary to secure the comparable rights of others or aggregate common interest. যে কথা আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট সকালে বলেছেন যে you have to balance between the individual and the collective. And when it is totally repugnant to the collective interest, probably some restrictions may be imposed. But ekhane, for this gathering, let me just remind one thing. Yes, কিছু limitations বা restrictions hote pare, but these restrictions must be based not on some subjective understanding or satisfaction of the executive. It has to be both on subjective and objective rationalities, reasons. যার ভিত্তিতে there can be certain restrictions, but these restrictions are again on an ad hoc basis, ad interim basis, not once and for all. The next one, please. তাহলে কি দাঁড়াচ্ছে? আমাদের যে বর্তমানে যে হিউম্যান রাইটস ডিসকোর্স, যে হিউম্যান রাইটস এর যে জুরিসপ্রুডেন্স, সেই নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ, হুএভার ইজ ইন চার্জ প্লিজ। হ্যাঁ, আমাদের নেক্সট এটাই, দিস ইজ দি অনলি সেন্টেন্স আমাদের বোঝার দরকার আর কি, যে হোয়াট ইজ হিউম্যান রাইটস? হিউম্যান রাইটস ইজ নাথিং বাট হিউম্যান ডিগনিটি। Ensure a life with dignity. এবং দেখুন, our proclamation of independence 1971, 10 April 1971, মুজিবনগর, কি বলা হচ্ছে ওখানে? আমরা কেন মুক্তিযুদ্ধ করছি? In order to ensure for the people of Bangladesh equality, social justice and human dignity. That's it. আপনি হিউম্যান ডিগনিটিকে বলতে পারেন শুধুমাত্র হিউম্যান রাইটস, অর আমরা একটা সরল অঙ্ক করতে পারি, এবং সেটা হচ্ছে ইকুয়ালিটি প্লাস সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস প্লাস হিউম্যান ডিগনিটি ইকুয়াল টু হিউম্যান রাইটস। দ্যাটস ইট। দিস ইজ হোয়াট ইজ হিউম্যান রাইট। সো উইদাউট সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস দ্যার ইজ নো হিউম্যান রাইট, উইদাউট ডিগনিটি দ্যার ইজ নো হিউম্যান রাইট। এখন এই যে আমাদের, তাহলে আমাদের এখানে টয়লেটের প্রশ্ন কেন আমি আনলাম? দ্য নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। Then why I'm talking about the twilight of human rights? You see, the problems are these. And these are the unresolved areas in human rights jurisprudence. A generations of human rights are dichotomy. আমরা বলি যে ফার্স্ট জেনারেশন রাইট, সেকেন্ড জেনারেশন রাইট, থার্ড জেনারেশন রাইট, ফোর্থ জেনারেশন রাইট। এখন গ্রামীণ গেছে 5G তে, 5G তে। আমার মনে হয় হিউম্যান রাইটস 5G তে নিয়ে যাবো কিনা জানি না। এটা if the honorable speaker permits, we can propose something of a fifth generation of human rights in Bangladesh. এই যে জেনারেশনাল, আরে এটা কেমন করে হয়? If human rights are indivisible, if human rights are correlated and interrelated, how can you divide between civil and political rights on the one hand and economic, social, and cultural rights on the other? You cannot do it. In any case, in any right you think of, there is a correlation, there is interdependence of human rights. So the dichotomy is still there. এবং এটা নিয়ে অনেকে পিএইচডি থিস, আমাদের ভাগ্য ভালো যে আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট, আমাদের মাননীয় স্পিকার, she has done her PhD on right to life, and very specific. কিন্তু অনেকে আছেন যারা এই জেনারেশনাল আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং অফ হিউম্যান, এটার উপরে পিএইচডি করেছে। হাইজ্যাক ডিগনিটি অফ দ্য কমন ম্যান, এটা বলতে গেলে আমি জানি না আমাদের হিউম্যান রাইটস চেয়ারম্যানে বসে আছেন, ওনার চোখে হয়তো পানি আসবে। আমরা মানুষকে দেখেছি যে মানুষকে কত অসহায় মানুষ হতে পারে, সেই মানুষগুলোর অধিকারকে, সেই মানুষগুলোর যে মর্যাদা আছে, এই মর্যাদার কথাটা, যে মর্যাদা কিনা আমার সংবিধানে, যে মর্যাদা আমার এই রাষ্ট্রের অভ্যুদয়ে এত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা পালন করেছে, সেই মর্যাদাকে আমরা ভুলে গেছি। How you are dealing with individuals at times, and I am referring to the executive in most of the situations যেটা হয়, the excesses committed by the executive, the excesses. তাই আমরা এখন বলছি যে আমরা নতুন একটি দাবি তুলেছি আমরা, and I think my friend from Nepal would be happy to know that this is what we did together with the Kathmandu School of Law with Professor Jubarassan Gurula, that a new concept of right to have rights. We must be ensured the right to have rights. Every individual member of society must have the right to have rights. এখনো পৃথিবীতে অনেক মানুষ আছে, they do not consider to be human beings in the sense that you can enjoy certain rights. তাছাড়া কেমন করে আজকে 21st century আমরা এই পৃথিবীতে আমরা শুনতে পারি, আচ্ছা ওরা, these Ukrainian refugees seem to be very civilized, তাদের বেশ সভ্য মনে হচ্ছে, তাদের রংটা আমাদের রঙের মতো, তাদের চেহারাগুলো না আমাদের মতো, এবং মনে হচ্ছে আমার বাড়ির পাশে নেইবার হিসেবে তারাও থাকতে পারে। এরা তো they don't look like someone from Afghanistan, they don't look like someone from Syria, they don't look like someone from Yemen, someone from Myanmar. তার মানে কি, ও ইউরোপ, তুমি আমাকে এত বাণী শুনিয়েছো মানবাধিকারের, এত বাণী শুনিয়ে তুমি আমাদের শুনিয়েছো যে উই আর অল ইকুয়াল and born equal with equal rights, এত বড় বড় কথা শুনেছো, আর আজকে এসে দেখছি তোমার মনের গহীনে কিভাবে তুমি এভাবে বর্ণবাদী হয়ে তুমি বৈষম্যমূলক আচরণ করো মানুষের সঙ্গে। কোথায় মানুষের মর্যাদা? ইউনিপোলার যে হাইজ্যাক ডিগ্রি, আচ্ছা এরপর ইউনিপোলার ওয়ার্ল্ড আফটার দ্য ফল অফ সোশ্যালিজম, কি মুশকিল হয়ে গেল যে সমাজতন্ত্রের পতনের পর whatever might be your political ideology, but one thing I can assure you, and one thing is true, historically that is true, that the socialist countries had been the natural allies of the developing world. এবং এটা কথা কে এত জোরে বলবে যদি আমরা না বলি, যার বাংলাদেশ, আমরা জানি যে আমাদের জাতি সত্তার যে অভ্যুদয়, আমাদের রাষ্ট্র সত্তা প্রতিষ্ঠিত হবার পেছনে সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়নের কত বড় ভূমিকা ছিল, বিকজ সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়ন and that was a socialist state. আমরা এগুলো তো অস্বীকার করে লাভ নেই। আমি ধনবাদী হতে পারি, আমি পুঁজিবাদী হতে পারি, কিন্তু ইতিহাসকে আমি অস্বীকার করব কিভাবে? The province of freedom of expression, এই যে আমাদের ফ্রিডম অফ এক্সপ্রেশন কোথায় শুরু এবং কোথায় গিয়ে আমি রেখা টানবো, যে কতটুকু পর্যন্ত আমার এই ফ্রিডমটা আমি এক্সারসাইজ করতে পারবো এবং কতটুকু পারবো না, কোনটা হলে এটা একটা রাষ্ট্রের বিরুদ্ধে এটি একটা অপরাধ হিসেবে গণ্য হতে পারে। যে কথা হুমা খানও বলে গেছে যে হাউ ডু ড্র দিস লাইন, দ্য ডিমার্কেটিং লাইন, ইউ সি, এন্ড দ্যাট ইজ এগেইন ভেরি ডিবেটেবল। এনফোর্সমেন্ট, কালচার অফ ইম্পিউনিটি, এই যে কালচার অফ ইম্পিউনিটির কারণে আমাদের তো এটা আলোচনা করা দরকার যে দেয়ার ক্যানট বি এনি ইম্পিউনিটি, ইট হ্যাজ টু বি, এভরিথিং হ্যাজ টু বি বেসড অন দ্য রুল অফ ল। আজকে যে আজকে যে এই যে হিউম্যান রাইটস আলোচনা করছে, and it's a very welcome I think approach. এই আলাপ আলোচনা আমাদেরকে একদম মুক্তভাবে করা দরকার, so that আমাদের যদি কোন রকম ল্যাপসেস থেকে থাকে in our governance, আমরা আমরা ধরিয়ে দিতে পারি, সেটা নিয়ে যেন কথা বলতে পারি, এবং আমাদের শুধরানো যদি প্রয়োজন হয় আমরা যেন নিজেদেরকে শুধরিয়ে নিতে পারি। আমরা তো জানি না যে আমরা কখনোই চাই না। আমরা কিন্তু গর্বিত একটি স্বাধীন জাতি। এই গর্বিত স্বাধীন জাতি কখনোই চায় না যে অন্য কোনো রাষ্ট্র আমাদের বিরুদ্ধে নিষেধাজ্ঞা আরোপ করুক। তুমি কে আমার নিষেধাজ্ঞা দিবা? তুমি কে আমাকে অপমান করবা? শুধু ওই ক্ষেত্রটি যেন প্রস্তুত না হয়, সে সুযোগগুলো যে গ্রহণ করতে না পারে, আমাদেরকে নিজেদেরকেই তাই এদিকে কাজ করতে হবে। আমাদের যদি কোনো ঘাটতি থেকে থাকে সেগুলো পূরণ করতে হবে, যেন কেউ আমাদের কোনো ধরনের দুর্বলতার সুযোগ না নিতে পারে। আমি আর এগুলো নিয়ে আমি আর ওটা নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস নিয়ে একটু কথা বলতে পারি বোধহয় না, আমরা একদম আপনি নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। Is there anyone who is আমার পাওয়ার পয়েন্টে কি ওখানে রেগুলেট করছেন? হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা নেক্সট, এটা বাদ দেন, নেক্সট ওয়ান। ওকে, এই যে সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস, দেখেন এই এসেন্স অফ সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস, আমি যে ডিস্ট্রিবিউটিভ জাস্টিসের কথা বলছি, ডিস্ট্রিবিউটিভ জাস্টিস। এখন এগুলো বিস্তৃত ব্যাখ্যা করার সুযোগ নেই, সময়ও নেই, বাট ইউ সি আমাদের জাস্টিস টু ইচ অ্যাকর্ডিং টু হিজ নিড, অ্যাকর্ডিং টু হিজ ওয়ার্থ, according to his merit, according to his work, according to his agreements. So content of social justice needs to be understood in the light of equality, social dynamics, prevailing laws, and political stature of the society. এর পরেরটাতে চলে যান তো প্লিজ, একটু নেক্সট ওয়ান। আমি বলছি যে সোশ্যাল জাস্টিস ইজ পিপলস জাস্টিস। Because social justice is people's justice, where tyranny of power is transformed into democracy of social good. So the idea of social justice is this. এবং let me just আপনারা একটু মনোযোগ দিয়ে এই কথাটা একটু শুনেন, যে justice without power is inefficient. Power without justice is tyranny. Justice without power is opposed because there are always wicked men. এরশাদ আছে, জিয়া আছে, আরে বাপ রে বাপ, কে উইকেড, তারা তো সুযোগ নেয়। সুতরাং জাস্টিস উইদাউট পাওয়ার is opposed because there are always wicked men. Power without justice is soon questioned. Justice and power must therefore be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful and whatever is powerful may be just. This is the context, in the conjunction of which we need to understand the concept of social justice. আমরা আর ওই আমাদের আদালতে যে সিদ্ধান্তগুলো নিয়ে যাচ্ছি না, নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ, নেক্সট ওয়ান। আমি আমার সময় চলে আসছে, আমি আচ্ছা আমার এটা নেক্সট ওয়ান প্লিজ। এটার পরে চলে যান, নেক্সট ওয়ান। স্কিপ করেন প্লিজ, স্কিপ করেন। নেক্সট ওয়ান, আমি সময় নেই আমাদের, স্কিপ করেন। আচ্ছা, রাইট, এখানে আসি আমরা, যে আমরা যে ডাইভার্সিটির কথা আমি নিয়ে এসেছি আমার টাইটেলে। সো ডাইভার্সিটি, দেখুন আমরা কিন্তু সবসময় একটা কথা খুব বেশি উচ্চারণ করি, আমরা সবসময় বলি ইউনিটি ইন ডাইভার্সিটি। আমরা বলি, কিন্তু আমরা কি বিশ্বাস করি? This is, I would like to draw the attention of the audience, especially Aromadi. This is something that is very close to your heart. So this is what I am emphasizing. দেখুন এখানে দেখুন, যখন আমরা হিউম্যান রাইটস ভার্সেস ডাইভার্সিটি, আমি ইন্ডিজিনাসনেস নিয়ে এখানে প্রশ্ন তুলছি। দেখুন আমাদের unfortunately when we have আমরা বলি যে small ethnic minorities, আমাদের যে লিগ্যাল টার্মিনোলজি ব্যবহার করি আমরা, ক্ষুদ্র নৃতাত্ত্বিক জনগোষ্ঠী, তারা ক্ষুদ্র বাঙালিদের তুলনায়। আবার বাঙালিকে যদি আমরা তুলনা করি চীনাদের সঙ্গে, তাহলে তখন বাঙালিরা হয়ে যাবে একদমই ক্ষুদ্র থেকে ক্ষুদ্রাংশ। সুতরাং এই ক্ষুদ্র নাম্বার গেমে যাওয়া কি উচিত, যদি আমরা if we are concerned with human dignity? That's something that we need to think over. কিন্তু দেখুন আমরা যে এই যে আমরা ডাইভার্সিটিকে গ্রহণ করি না কেন, বা আমরা বলি যে ইউনিটি ইন ডাইভার্সিটি, আমাদের এই 60টি রঙের মাঝে আমি মিল খুঁজে না পাই, জানি না তো কেমন করে কি দিয়ে সাজাই। সুন্দর একটা গান আছে, 7টা রং ধরুন 7টা রং নিয়ে একসঙ্গে মিলেমিশে গেছে। কিন্তু আমরা গানটাকে ভালোবাসি, কিন্তু আমরা 7টা রং কেন যেন মিশাতে খুব একটা পছন্দ করি না। তাই আমরা হোলি খেলি না, হোলির দিনে আমরা ইস্কনের মূর্তি ভাঙি, মাঝে মাঝে ভেঙে ফেলি। ওই যে কিছু দুষ্ট লোক আছে যারা এই কাজগুলো করে। কেন? এই যে সাস্টেইনেবিলিটি ভার্সেস প্রোডাক্টিভিটি। The indigenous people, they believe in sustainable environment. They are the nurturers and protectors of the forest. আর আমরা কি করেছি? আমরা ফরেস্টকে শেষ করে দিয়ে আমাদের ডিওএইচএস এর বাড়ি ঘরে দরজা জানালা সব আমরা সেগুন কাঠ দিয়ে তৈরি করে ফেলেছি। This is what we do. তাহলে দেখুন যে সাস্টেইনেবিলিটি ভার্সেস প্রোডাক্টিভিটি কি হতে পারে। ডাইভার্সিটি, যেখানে ডাইভার্সিটি তারা যখন যেরকম, আমরা মনোকালচারে বিশ্বাস করি। কালেকটিভিটি ভার্সেস ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালিটি, দে বিলিভ ইন, চিন্তা করতে পারেন যে তারা জমির মালিকানা, অ্যাম্বাসেডর ইমতিয়াজ, আপনার জমির মালিকানা, আপনার সত্ত্ব লাগবে, টাইটেল ডিড লাগবে, আপনার রেজিস্ট্রেশন আছে কিনা, বাট দে ডোন্ট বিলিভ ইন দ্যাট। দে ডোন্ট বিলিভ ইন ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল ওনারশিপ, দে বিলিভ ইন কালেকটিভ কমিউনাল ওনারশিপ। আমরা সকলেই সবকিছুর মালিক, সকলেই সবকিছুর মালিক। তা আমার ব্যক্তিগত মিজানুর রহমানের নামে একটা জমি থাকতে হবে কেন? তো সমগ্র কমিউনিটির নামে রয়েছে। The benefit would be accrued by the whole community as such. আর আমরা বিশ্বাস করি কি ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালিটি, and individually leads to competition, in very unhealthy competition. এবং আমাদের কম্পিটিশনের মটোটা কি হয়ে দাঁড়ায়? একমাত্র আমি যেন টিকে থাকি, অন্য সবাই কোভিডে মারা যাক। দ্যাটস হোয়াট উই, আমাদের মনের গহীনে আমরা এই ইচ্ছাটাকে পোষণ করি এবং ধারণ করি। ন্যাচারালিটি বা অর্গানিক ভার্সেস ইঞ্জিনিয়ার, দে বিলিভ ইন ন্যাচারাল এন্ড অর্গানিক থিংস। আর আমরা কি কত বেশি হবে জেনেটিক্যালি মডিফাইড জিএম ফুড পাওয়া যাবে, কেননা প্রোটিন বেশি হবে, আমার লাভ বেশি হবে, পুঁজি বেশি হবে। দ্যাট ইজ দি রুল, দ্যাট ইজ দি লেট মোটিভ অফ ক্যাপিটালিজম। স্পিরিচুয়ালিটি ভার্সেস রেশনালিটি, তারা দি বিলিভ ইন স্পিরিচুয়াল ভ্যালুজ। আর আমরা এই সমস্ত, ইজ ইট রেশনাল, ইজ ইট রিজনেবল, এবং রিজনেবল কথাটা কি আমাদের, আমরা যে whether it is practical or not। তুমি ভালো কথা বলেছো, কিন্তু that's not practical, it's impractical। তুমি একটু বাস্তববাদী হও, একটু পৃথিবীতে এই ভূপৃষ্ঠে নেমে আসো, তুমি তো মহাশূন্যে বিচরণ করছো। সাবসিস্টেন্স ভার্সেস কমার্শিয়ালিটি, ওরা বেঁচে থাকতে চায় পৃথিবীতে যেভাবে এসছে, পৃথিবীর একজন অনুষঙ্গ হয়ে সকলের সঙ্গে মিলেমিশে। আর আমরা কোনটাতে আমার লাভ বেশি, সুতরাং কি ওই সাজেক্ট না কি, ওখানে ওই সাজেক্টের ওই প্রকৃতি রাখা যাবে না, ওখানে 5 স্টার একটা হোটেল তৈরি করতে হবে যেন আমার লাভ বেশি হয়, আমি যেন আরো বেশি অর্থবান হতে পারি। সো হোয়াট হ্যাপেন? নেক্সট ইতে নিয়ে যান প্লিজ, আমি শেষ করে দিই, নেক্সট ইতে একটু নিয়ে যান। তাহলে কি, isn't it the betrayal of social justice? This is what I'm leading you to think. যে তাহলে কি আমরা কি, আর উই ইন দি এজ অফ betrayal of social justice? আমরা যেটা লক্ষ্য করছি, অ্যাডমিনিস্ট্রেটিভ হার্টলেস ইনসেনসিটিভিটি টু হিউম্যান রাইটস। দেখুন, আমি একটি কথা খুব স্পষ্ট করে বলছি, এবং ইন ফ্রন্ট অফ দ্য অনারেবল স্পিকার আমি কথার উচ্চারণ করছি। আমাদের দেশে বর্তমানে যা কিছু ভালো হচ্ছে, মানবাধিকারের জন্য, দরিদ্র মানুষের জন্য, বঞ্চিতদের জন্য যা কিছু হচ্ছে, দ্যাট ইজ জাস্ট বিকজ অফ ওয়ান সিঙ্গেল পারসন, যার নাম হচ্ছে শেখ হাসিনা। একজন দয়ালু মানবতাবাদী একজন প্রধানমন্ত্রী রয়েছেন। উনি যদি না থাকতেন তাহলে গুচ্ছ গ্রাম আদর্শ কিচ্ছু হতো না। উনি যদি না থাকতেন, বিধবা ভাতা, স্ট্রিক, কিন্তু এগুলো কি দেখুন, ওনার দয়া দাক্ষিণ্য, এবং উনি যেটা করছেন এখানে কিন্তু একটু আগে হুমা খান বলে গেলেন যে এভরিথিং শুড বি রাইট বেসড, কিন্তু আমার এখনো কিন্তু যেটা মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী করছেন, ইট ইজ স্টিল হার উইলিংনেস বেসড। যেটাকে আমরা আইনা ভাষায় বলি চ্যারিটি বেসড। রাষ্ট্র আমাকে চ্যারিটি করছে, কিন্তু আমরা কিন্তু চ্যারিটিতে বেঁচে থাকতে চাই না। ওই যে মর্যাদা, যদি মর্যাদার প্রশ্নে নিয়ে আসি, তাহলে তো আমরা এটা আমার অধিকার হিসেবে দেখতে চাই। এই চ্যারিটিটাকে এখন অধিকারে রূপান্তরিত করা, দ্যাট ইজ দ্য টাস্ক লাইং অ্যাহেড অফ দ্য হিউম্যান রাইটস অ্যাক্টিভিস্টস ইন দিস কান্ট্রি টুডে। সেটা হচ্ছে আমাদের প্রধানতম দায়িত্ব বোধহয় হবে। কেন দেখুন, আমাদের সব দিকে দেখুন, ওয়াইড স্প্রেড গ্যাপ বিটুইন দ্য রিচ অ্যান্ড দ্য পুয়ার, আদিবাসী eviction from ancestral land, land ownership and control on means of production, land acquisition in the garb of politics of development, voiceless being still exploited, the Dalitদের কথা, women's non-access to property rights, child exploitation, shockingly subhuman slums and shanties, denial of access to justice, judicial, economic, political, lawlessness of laws, and corruption. The odyssey of national progress is marred by these human rights tragedies. এত ভালো ভালো পদক্ষেপ. You should be so lucky to have a prime minister like Sheikh Hasina. We must be so lucky to have, and I tell you, to have a speaker like Dr. Shirin Chaudhary, who is so eloquent in her understanding of jurisprudence. এইরকম একজন স্পিকার যদি থাকে, আমরা কেন শিরিনের কাছে দাবি করব না যে আমরা আরো বেশি সংখ্যক প্রো পিপল লেজিসলেশন আমরা এই দেশে দেখতে চাই। আমরা অনেক বেশি প্রো পুর লেজিসলেশন আমাদের জাতীয় সংসদে আমরা দেখতে চাই। আমরা প্রো রিচ আমরা দেখতে চাই না। শুধুমাত্র যখন বলা হবে যে কোভিডের জন্য আমরা এই ভর্তুকি দিচ্ছি, আমরা ঋণ সুবিধা দিচ্ছি, শুধুমাত্র মালিকেরা পাবে এবং মালিকরা আরো ধনবান হবে, আরো ধনী হবে, না, আমরা চাই যে গার্মেন্টস এর যারা শ্রমিক, আমরা গার্মেন্টস এর মালিকদের সবকিছু করলাম, আর গার্মেন্টস এর শ্রমিকরা কেমন করে গ্রাম থেকে সে কাজে এসে যোগদান দেবে সেই কথা তো কখনো কেউ চিন্তা করলো না। কোনো গার্মেন্টস মালিক তাদের জন্য একটা বাসেরও ব্যবস্থা করলো না যে ঘাটে তুমি নৌকো করে নামবে, তারপর আমার বাসটা তোমাকে নিয়ে আসবে, তুমি যেমন করে পারো আসো, আসলে তোমার চাকরি আছে, না হলে তোমার চাকরি নাই। This is human dignity, this is social justice, this is distributive justice, this is what we. সুতরাং আমি এখানেই শেষ করছি। I'm sorry for taking probably a bit of more time, কিন্তু যেহেতু the speaker is here, তাই আমি এই কথাগুলো বলার কারণটাই হচ্ছে যে স্পিকারের কাছে আমি এদেশের জনগণের হয়ে আমি করজোরে প্রার্থনা করতে চাই যে এমন কাজ করুন যেন এই দেশের দরিদ্র যে মানুষ রয়েছে তাদের পক্ষে যেন অধিক পরিমাণ আইন যেন প্রণীত হয়। এই রাষ্ট্র যেটা বঙ্গবন্ধুর সোনার বাংলা করতে চেয়েছিলেন সমগ্র মানুষকে নিয়ে, সেই সোনার বাংলা যেন আমরা আমাদের জীবদ্দশাতেই দেখতে পারি। কেননা আমার ভয় হয় যে আজকে শেখ হাসিনা রয়েছেন জন্য আমরা এই স্বপ্নের কথা বলতে পারছি, উনি না থাকলে এই স্বপ্নের কথা আমরা উল্লেখ করতে পারবো কিনা সেটিও আমরা জানি না। কেননা ওই যে there are wicked men around us, এই উইকেড মেনরা কখন কখন ছোবল মারবে আমরা এখনো নিশ্চিতভাবে তা বলতে পারি না। Thank you very much for being with me for so long.
Thank you, sir. I think we would have done more justice if we could have afforded to allow you half an hour more to cover. I mean, certainly you have brought in very interesting elements and issues on the table. Social justice we are talking about, and it certainly makes sense that the charity should not be the way of ensuring human rights. It has to be a rule based, and I must compliment you. Perhaps we are a little constrained by the formality of this forum. Otherwise, we would have received a much louder applause and clappings from the audience and our participants. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable and insightful as well as prescriptive presentation. May I now turn to Mr. Suhash Vosti to make his presentation. Mr. Vosti is the Senior Protection Officer at UNHCR. Mr. Vosti, please take the floor.
Honorable Speaker of the Parliament, Honorable Chairperson of the National Human Rights Commission, Honorable Members of Parliament, fellow panelists, distinguished Ambassador Kazi Imtiaz, Chairman of the BASE, the Director General BASE, distinguished panelists, learned audience, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here representing the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in this session today to talk about how the rights of forcibly displaced people globally are also human rights. A lot has been said previously, so my job is just to show some linkage, how they are part and parcel of the broader human rights, the rights of asylum seekers, refugees, internally displaced people, the stateless people around the world, and how we work together to mobilize the mechanism, national, regional, global, to help these people exercise their right that exist. I would also like to start drawing a caution that the discussions today, the presentation that I'm going to make, are not necessarily related to the refugee situation in Bangladesh. We have been invited to present how the refugee rights are linked to the global human rights, universal human rights, and also share some good examples, some practices from around the world that may be inspiring. So in that sense, it does not specifically focus on the situation, the refugee situation in Bangladesh. However, I cannot start any of my conversation in such settings without acknowledging and admiring the generosity of Bangladesh. The government, its people, and peoples of all walks of life have extended to now nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees in the country. In the last influx in 2017, August, I was in Cox's Bazar. I was working there, and I have seen it with my eyes from day one of that latest influx, how the people of Bangladesh, the host communities, the government, and all state mechanism structures have generously given protection to these people that have fled persecution in Myanmar. So my deep appreciation, once again, on behalf also of my organization, as well as personally. I will not read all the lines in the slides, but I would like to start also by quoting our Assistant High Commissioner for Protection, Ms. Gillian Triggs, who said in 2020 at the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council, how international human rights and the international human rights laws are key to protecting the rights of asylum seekers, refugees, stateless people, and those forcibly displaced within the country, the internally displaced people. Much has been said again, I will not repeat. When forced displacement happens, it starts with the violation of the human rights of those people that are displaced. So that is in the root cause of forced displacement, the violation of the very human rights of the people. The human rights are also violated while they are fleeing, while they are waiting in many parts of the world for their, let's say, a protection to be guaranteed through due processes, as well as afterwards. So this is a situation that does not isolate asylum seekers, refugees, stateless people, and the internally displaced people from the overall umbrella of universal human rights. Human rights are inalienable rights, as it has been said previously by all different speakers. And as the UN agency mandated to help ensure that rights of asylum seekers, refugees are protected, those of stateless people are protected, we work very closely as part of the UN mechanism with various stakeholders to ensure that these rights are upheld, respected, and people are enabled to exercise their rights. And as such, the human rights mechanism in particular that is in place in the UN system comes quite into the play. It's a cross-cutting theme, human rights. It is in all UN policies and programs, as mentioned there with the bullet points. And it is our job as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to work across the board within the UN family, as well as our partners, stakeholders, from the authorities to regional bodies, to our civil society organization partners, NGO community, international NGO communities, our donors, everyone, to make sure that human rights are streamlined, are mainstreamed into providing and ensuring protection of the people that we serve. Globally, we're talking about an estimated 84 million people. That is as of late last year. However, we all know at least 3.5 million more Ukrainians have been uprooted in the last few weeks. So the number keeps increasing. And the challenges faced by these people, and behind all those numbers, there are faces, there are human lives, women, children, disabled, vulnerable in many other ways. These particularly, and in the universal sense, one of the most marginalized people around the globe, they continue to face challenges, face stigmatization. The asylum space continues to shrink over the years. They face discrimination, xenophobia in many parts of the world. I have witnessed it particularly myself while working in different parts of the world for refugees and asylum seekers. And the poverty, the exclusion of asylum seekers, refugees from accessing and enjoying their basic fundamental rights, which otherwise you and I take for granted for ourselves. These are some of the severe challenges facing, the dilemmas facing these people that have been uprooted around the world. And they are now, their realization of these rights are mainstreamed, are centralized also in various UN efforts that are made together with the member states across the globe. UNHCR and other UN organs have particularly made some specific efforts in the last few years to advocate for realization of these rights as part and parcel of the global efforts to exercise, to enable people to exercise and enjoy the rights that they have. The rights of this of the asylum seekers, refugees, stateless people, they are not just enshrined in particular instruments that are either legally or morally binding. They are included in all different instruments. Here are only some of the examples. The right to seek asylum, as has been also referred to the instrument, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It provides that right. The declaration is not a legally binding document, but it is part and parcel of the international customary law, as well as it's also morally binding. Now, the access to territory and access to seek asylum, they're also incorporated in the International Convention Against Torture, the children's right, protection against refoulement, as we call it, the forced return of someone who is seeking asylum to a territory, to a place where his or her life and liberty would be at risk. So these rights are incorporated in all these different international covenants, treaties, and other instruments. They're also part and parcel of many regional instruments, particularly from Europe, Africa, that I have not necessarily mentioned here. Right to nationality, birth registration, deprivation, protection from deprivation of liberty, right to work, right to return home when I choose as an asylum seeker, as a refugee. These are fundamental human rights. These are rights not only not only just that are applicable to asylum seekers and refugees, but also all human beings. So they are part and parcel of the universal rights set. To emphasize this, in 2020, the Secretary General has also called upon action ensuring that protection of people in conflict and in peace times is at the center of everything we do. That was one of the calls that the Secretary General made at the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council meeting. So how do we do? Just a few examples. As UNHCR, as I said earlier, we work with these mechanisms, different mechanisms, to make sure that refugees' rights are protected. We cannot, as UNHCR, alone achieve this. So we work with those mechanisms in different ways, bilaterally, multilaterally, and at national, regional, and global level. And the areas that we focus to make sure that either there is an improvement or the gaps are addressed are the following: to make sure that refugees are protected against expulsion and being forcibly returned to a place where their life and liberty is in danger. They are not arbitrarily detained just because they have been in a place as a refugee. Their threats to life and liberty, physical security are addressed. They are entitled to their universal birth registration that leads to securing their identity, which is dignity, without which no dignity can be achieved. And people are prevented from being rendered stateless. And then states also access to conventions related to refugee matters and statelessness. So these are some of the key areas where UNHCR works very closely with the human rights mechanism, globally, regionally, as well as at the national level. Then the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review process, is quite significant in our efforts in doing so. What I gave some examples of earlier. It helps us engage, collaborate, and share information with all actors, help the states to implement the recommendations that they have committed to, bring to the attention of the states and all other actors the situation, what the real situation in terms of protecting asylum seekers, refugees, stateless people are. So these are mechanisms that we continue to work with, engage, and then work towards collectively improving the protection space, the protection space, as well as ensuring dignity to these people and exercise their rights while they are in refuge, the rights when they return home, or when they find other solutions. The key areas, some of which I alluded to already, that we continue to focus on are these: the advocacy and dialogue with the host states and other states, the partnership we use, for which we use the mechanism to ensure, to address the situation of asylum seekers and refugees and stateless people in different places. I will not go over all of the points, and how we also help build the capacity, the awareness raising among all different entities in enabling them, helping them to fulfill their obligations, commitment towards protecting the forcibly displaced people and the stateless people, and also to, at times, seek and mobilize urgent action in protecting individuals. When I was working in Bulgaria, for example, we have maintained our engagement and mobilized our regional human rights bodies to prevent the extradition of asylum seekers, refugees, without due process to a place, a country where their life and liberty will be in danger. We work very closely with the human rights, the European human rights mechanism there as well. So these are some of the interventions that we, again, rely upon on the collaboration of our partners. So what happens when we engage? Policies, national laws, practices are improved, changed. There are increasing coordination, improved coordination among different UN agencies as well as partners. Refugees, asylum seekers are included in national plans, national policies, national legislations, and the capacity of various authorities as well as other structures in the country, civil society and others are improved, which are more refugee sensitive, which are more protection sensitive, and improve the overall situation. And here I bring a few, I think 5 examples of from different locations, different countries around the world, what we did, what happened in some of the countries where we engaged our partners. The first example is from Spain. The problem was that the victims of trafficking were systematically denied recognition. So as part of our engagement through the human rights mechanism, eventually the national government amended its laws and policies. Another example is from the Republic of Korea. There were problems in registering children born to foreign parents in the country. We engaged the authorities, we engaged with the partners, and what happened is that the government has now announced that there will be policy, the new law will be adopted to provide for birth registration of children born to parents with foreign nationalities. We also work with the World Bank, which provides support, development support to host communities, as well as the refugees when there are large-scale situations. Like in Ethiopia, donors that form the part of World Bank response or provide the funding have supported the recommendations that have been made to also address birth registration problems facing refugee children in the country. So Ethiopia has, after the support also of the World Bank and the donors, has now supported the recommendation that was made at the UPR process to ensure registration of refugee children from single parents. In Bulgaria, statelessness related matters, as well as matters related to accessing the territory, bad practices along the borders, we have engaged and there have been supportive recommendations. Governments have committed to implement those recommendations. In Austria, through our engagement, again, through the human rights mechanism, now we have universities offering tertiary education to refugees or people who have temporary protection and other forms of enhanced protection enjoying the country. Scholarships are awarded, education, access to education for people who are in need of enhanced protection. These are some of those key examples. There's a list of such good practices and examples. There are not so many, but there are definitely some very good that are also publicly available. Last one. Last one. Thank you very much. Refugee rights are also human rights. Thank you for your attention and the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vosti. Indeed, refugee rights are human rights, and we see through your intervention the very important work that UNHCR is doing globally. We have almost come to our last part of our seminar today, and we would have an open question and answer session after the Honorable Member of Parliament, Madam Aruma, that will make her presentation. So may I now request the Honorable Member of the Parliament to kindly take the floor. And
lighter.
Thank you. শুভ অপরাহ্ন, honorable chief guest, our speaker, Dr. Shirin Sherman Chaudhary, the chair, other distinguished guests and speakers. Good afternoon. আমি বাংলায় বলবো। আজকে আমার মনে হচ্ছিল যে আমি যেন সেই ছাত্রকালে ফিরে গেলাম। So I wanted to be a student, not a speaker here. It's just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. আজকে যে আমরা ইস্যুগুলো নিয়ে কথা বলছিলাম, তো আমার জন্য বলার হলো ensuring rights to invisible communities. তো দুঃখের বিষয় হলো আমার ভালোও লাগলো, গর্বও লাগলো, কিন্তু প্রফেসর ডক্টর মিজানুর রহমান উনি প্রায় সবটাই বলে ফেলেছেন, তো আমার জন্য কাজটা কম। তবে আমি এখানে একটু শুরু করি, আমি বাস্তব কথা দিয়ে শুরু করি। এই রাষ্ট্রটা, বাংলাদেশ রাষ্ট্র, টোটালি ফান্ডামেন্টাল ভায়োলেশন অফ রাইটস এর উপরে যুদ্ধ করে একটি অসাধারণ মুক্তিযুদ্ধের উপরে একটি রাষ্ট্র হলো টু এস্টাবলিশ রাইটস এবং to show the oppressors of the world what is people's power for fighting and establishing a right-based nation, which is Bangladesh, যা করতে পেরেছিলেন সর্বকালের সর্বশ্রেষ্ঠ বাঙালি আমাদের জাতির পিতা বঙ্গবন্ধু শেখ মুজিবুর রহমান। তার সাথে 30 লাখ শহীদ প্রাণ দিয়েছেন অকাতরে, তার সাথে আমাদের অনেক নারী, তারাও তার ডিগনিটি বিসর্জন দিয়েছেন। আমরা সে কথাগুলো মুখে উচ্চারণ করি, কতটা রিয়েলাইজ করি সেটার ব্যাপারে এসছে। তো আজকে যে জায়গাটাকে আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে বঙ্গবন্ধু যে কনস্টিটিউশনটা তৈরি করেন, এখানে সবাই এক্সপার্ট, স্টার্টিং ফ্রম মাই অনারেবল স্পিকার ডক্টর শিরিন শারমিন চৌধুরী, এখানে আছেন ডক্টর মিজানুর রহমান, আরো যারা উপস্থিত আছেন, আমার অত্যন্ত প্রিয় চেয়ার নাসিমা আপা, হিউম্যান রাইটস কমিশনের। যে জায়গাটা হলো যে আমরা একটা জায়গায় গিয়ে আমরা এখনো মনে করছি যে আরো কিছু বাকি আছে, যে বাকির কাজটুকু আমাদের মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী করে যাচ্ছেন, এবং সবগুলো এক্সাম্পল কিছু দেওয়া হয়েছে, বলতে গেলে রাত কভার হয়ে যাবে। এই কথা দিয়ে আমি শুরু করি। এই জায়গাটা যে ফ্রেমটাই ছিল আমাদের কনস্টিটিউশনের ফ্রেমটাই কিন্তু হলো রাইট বেসড ফ্রেমের উপরে তৈরি টোটালি, এবং সেক্ষেত্রে আমরা যেখানে দেখতে পাচ্ছিলাম যে আনফিনিশড টাস্ক গুলোকে বঙ্গবন্ধুকে 75-এর সপরিবারে হত্যা করার পর 15ই আগস্ট তার আনফিনিশড টাস্কটা তার সুযোগ্য কন্যা আমাদের মাননীয় প্রধানমন্ত্রী শেখ হাসিনা এটাকে আরো পূর্ণাঙ্গ রূপ দিতে পারলেন। কি করে পারলেন? বিকজ শি ইজ এ হোমগ্রোন ডটার অফ দিস সয়েল, যে আকাশ থেকে আসেনি, যে 10তলা ফ্ল্যাট থেকে নামেনি, যে সেই মধুমতির গ্রাম থেকে মাটির থেকে কৃষকের বাচ্চার সাথে খেলতে খেলতে বড় হয়ে দুই বেনুনি দুলিয়ে প্রত্যেকটি মানুষের ব্যথা টেনে নিয়ে এনে সেটাকে বাস্তবায়িত করেছেন। এখন যে জায়গাটা আমার কাছে, যেটাকে আমরা সবাই জানি যে ডাইভার্সিটির কথাটা আমরা বলছি, দ্য বিউটি ইন ডাইভার্সিটি, এই সয়েলটা সবসময় ওয়াজ আ ভেরি ডাইভার্স সয়েল, যেখানে প্রত্যেক মানুষ সহবাস করেছিল উইথ ডিগনিটি, উইথ অনার, উইথ রাইটস, এবং প্রতিবারই এক একবার করে আঘাত এসেছে যাতে করে এই ডাইভার্সিফিকেশনটাকে আমরা ব্যবহার করি ফর টুল অফ সেগ্রিগেশন, এবং যাতে করে আমাদের ভেতরে জাস্টিস কথাটা যেন উড়ে যায়। এখন সেই ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখলাম কি, যে জাস্টিসের ব্যাপারটাকে নানাভাবে আজকে রূপান্তরিত করা হয়েছে। আমি ছোট করে বলে আসি, বিকজ টাইম ইজ ভেরি শর্ট, যে এখানে মাননীয় স্পিকার মহোদয় আছেন, যিনি ডক্টর শিরিন শারমিন চৌধুরী, যিনি মন্ত্রী ছিলেন, মহিলা বিষয়ক মন্ত্রণালয়ের মন্ত্রী ছিলেন। আমাদের নাসিমা আপা তখন সেক্রেটারি ছিলেন, এবং কতগুলো যে ল করেছিলেন। আমি জাস্ট একটু প্রথমে ওই যখন টাচ করে আমি ছেড়ে চলে যাব, যে নারীদের জন্য কতগুলো ল করা হয়েছিল। কেন করা হয়েছিল? যে বিশেষ করে আমরা দেখতে পেয়েছি যে নারীরা কিভাবে আমাদের এই রাষ্ট্রে নানাভাবে শোষিত, সমাজ দ্বারা এবং ডেফিনেটলি আমাদের সিস্টেম দ্বারাও, সেই জায়গাটা থেকে তারা একটা কঠিন প্রত্যয় নিয়ে, আমরা একটা দুটো না, মানে আমাদের মতো বাংলাদেশের মতো নারীদের জন্য প্রোটেকশনের মানে যে অধিকার সর্বক্ষেত্রে, সেটা আর কোনো কিন্তু পৃথিবীতে কোনো আর এক্সাম্পল নাই। তারপরে আমরা যারা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে আদিবাসীদের কথা, যেটা আমরা জানি, যেখানে আমরা পিস অ্যাকর্ড থেকে আরম্ভ করে এই জায়গাটা থেকে আমরা নানাভাবে অনেকভাবে যে জায়গাটা করা সম্ভব হয়েছে, সেই জায়গাটা সম্ভব সিস্টেমে নিয়ে আসা একটু কঠিন হচ্ছে। যে জায়গাটা আমারও কথা, যে আমরা অ্যাজ এ পার্লামেন্টেরিয়ান, আমাদের মাননীয় স্পিকার মহোদয় যেখানে আছেন, যিনি মানে লিগ্যাল এক্সপার্ট এবং তার হৃদয় এবং মন যেখানে আছেন, এবং প্রধানমন্ত্রীর এই জায়গাটাকে যদি আমরা আরো নিয়ে আসি কাছে করে, যে এখনো যে জায়গাগুলো আছে, যে বিশেষ করে যারা ইনভিজিবল যে গ্রুপটা আছে এখনো, তাদেরকে আরো আমরা মেইন স্ট্রিমে কিভাবে তার সুরক্ষা করা। ক্লাসিক এক্সাম্পল সবই আসলো, রোহিঙ্গা আসলো, কঠিন ব্যাপার। তারপরে আরেকটা যে জায়গা ভেরি রিসেন্ট, যে জায়গাটা হলো যে সুরক্ষা, এই যে আমাদের কোভিডের রিক্সাওয়ালা থেকে প্রেসিডেন্ট পর্যন্ত একই সিস্টেমে তারা ভ্যাকসিনেটেড হয়েছে। And our honorable Prime Minister made sure যেন একটি নাগরিকও সেই সুরক্ষার বলয় থেকে না ঝরে পড়ে। পৃথিবীতে এটার থেকে বড় এক্সাম্পল আর নাই, যেখানে পৃথিবী যুদ্ধ করছে এখনো কোভিড নিয়ে। তা আমি বলি যে আমরা এখনো চেষ্টা করছি, আরো করে যাচ্ছি, এবং আজকে আমরা জানি আপনার এখানে আছে হিউম্যান রাইটস কমিশনে, ডক্টর মিজান থাকতেই আমরা প্রসেসটা করেছি, আপনি এক্সিকিউট করেছেন যে থার্ড জেন্ডারদেরকে নিয়ে আসা, থার্ড জেন্ডারদেরকে ওখানে চাকরি দিয়েছেন, প্রধানমন্ত্রী তাদেরকে একেবারে সরাসরি তাদেরকে আইনগতভাবে প্রাতিষ্ঠানিক জায়গায় নিয়ে এসেছেন। আমরা সেক্স ওয়ার্কার্সদের কথা বলছি, তাদের জন্য চেষ্টা করা হচ্ছে। মানে যা আমরা নর্মাল মেইন স্ট্রিমের বলয়ের বাইরে আছে, সেই জায়গাটাকে আমরা আরো কি করে করব। আমাদের মাননীয় স্পিকার মহোদয় সেই জায়গাটার জন্য খুবই সচেষ্ট। সেদিন উনি উইমেন্স ডেতে, আমাদের 8ই মার্চ উইমেন্স ডেতে ট্রান্সজেন্ডারদের নিয়ে প্রথমবারের মতো উনি পার্লামেন্টে খোলা আকাশের তলায় তার অনুষ্ঠান করিয়েছেন, যে দেখো তারাও আমাদের রাইট ডিসেম্বরে, তো কথাটা যেটা হলো যে তাদেরকে এস্টাবলিশ করে দেখো, সুপার এক্সাম্পল টু দ্য ওয়ার্ল্ড, যে তোমরা দেখো, দাঁড়িয়ে দেখো যে আমি যেরকম গর্বিত স্পিকার, আমার এই দেশের এই ট্রান্সজেন্ডার মেয়েটি, তার নাম রানী, সেও একজন সম্মানিত, তার উইথ ডিগনিটি। দিস ইজ হোয়াট উই আর ডিসকাসিং অ্যাবাউট, আওয়ার ডিগনিটি অ্যান্ড জাস্টিস। তো আমি এই কথাটাই বলে শেষ করি। বঙ্গবন্ধুর ওই স্পিচটা প্রত্যেকের হৃদয়ের, যে স্পিচ ইজ এ ম্যাগনা কার্টা। 1974-এ যেটা উনি ইউনাইটেড নেশনসে বলেছিলেন, পরিষ্কার করে দুটো জিনিস উনি পৃথিবীকে জানিয়েছেন। পৃথিবীতে দুটো গ্রুপ আছে, শোষিত এবং শাসিত। আমি শোষিতদের দলে। এবং কত বড় হিম্মত হলে উনি বলতে পারেন নন অ্যালায়েন্সের জায়গায় নিউক্লিয়ার ওয়েপন স্টপ করা সেই সময়। এবং এই কথাটা এখনো কাটা দেয় ইউনাইটেড নেশনসে দাঁড়িয়ে, ইন প্রেজেন্স অফ অল বিগ পাওয়ার্স। বঙ্গবন্ধু শেখ মুজিবুর রহমান আমাদের জাতির পিতা বলে এসেছিলেন, স্টপ ফাইটিং ওভার ওয়েপন্স। আজকে আমরা এই নিউক্লিয়ার ওয়েপনের কথা ভয় পাচ্ছি, কখন কে কি করে ফেলে। এই যে কথাগুলো আসছে যে হিউম্যান রাইটস ভায়োলেশন, এই জায়গাটা একটা ইউনিভার্সাল ব্যাপার, প্রোভাইডেড আমরা যদি সবাই একসাথে একটা ইউনাইটেড নেশনস রেখেছি, তারাও যদি এটা ম্যানেজ না করতে পারে, তাহলে আমরা মানুষরা যে কথাটা আমরা হারবার্ট স্পেন্সারের কথা পরিষ্কার বলি, সার্ভাইভাল, ডারউইনের কথা, সার্ভাইভাল ফর দ্য ফিটেস্ট, এবং আমার এক্সিস্টেন্সের কথা উইথ ডিগনিটি, এবং আমার জাস্টিসের কথা, ইকুয়াল জাস্টিস, সেই জায়গাগুলোকে আমরা কিভাবে এটাকে ট্রান্সলেট করব ইন এ হোম গ্রোন ওয়ে, এটাই থাকবে। এবং সেটা হয়েছে কারণ আমরা বাইরে থেকে কোনো কিছু এক্সপোর্ট করে আনিনি। বাংলাদেশ, বঙ্গবন্ধু এবং জাতির পিতা, তার কন্যা শেখ হাসিনা, একেবারে প্রতিটি মানুষের চাহিদা, শিশু থেকে বৃদ্ধ পর্যন্ত নিয়ে আসা। কিন্তু আরো আমরা গভীরভাবে দেখবার কিছু প্রয়োজন আছে। সেই জায়গাগুলো আমার মনে হয় আমরা ধাপে ধাপে করছি। এবং মাননীয়, আজকে সব থেকে বড় অ্যাডভান্টেজ যে উনি আছেন আমাদের মাননীয় স্পিকার আমাদের সাথে, যিনি আমাদেরকে এগুলোকে করতে সাহায্য করবেন। বস্তির কথা, ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের রিফিউজি, তার উপরে আদিবাসীদের কথা, তারপরে রিলিজিয়াস মাইনরিটিদের কথা, তাদের ল্যান্ড রাইটস এর কথা, এই জায়গাগুলোকে আমরা কিভাবে সিস্টেমের মধ্যে আনবো। কারণ সিস্টেমটা একটু ঝামেলা আছে, পলিসিগতভাবে কোনো ঝামেলা নাই। সিস্টেমটাকে আমরা কিভাবে আরো হিউম্যান রাইটস ফ্রেন্ডলি এবং সেটা মানবিক জায়গা থেকে আরো সুরক্ষা করা, এটাই থাকবে আমাদের প্রত্যয়। আমার ভীষণ ভালো লেগেছে এই কথাটা, রাইট টু লাইফের জায়গাটা তো ওটা আছে। আই লাভড যে কথাটা বলেছে, এটা দিয়ে শেষ করি। আমাদের ডক্টর মিজান বলেছেন টুয়াইলাইট, টুয়াইলাইট থেকে টুয়াইলাইট হাসে, এটা কিন্তু সাইকেল, আস্তে সূর্য যায়, সেটাকে কোণে দেখা বলে। আমি একটু রোমান্টিক আর একটু বললাম, কিন্তু আমাদের আজকের অবস্থানের কথা বলছে সেই টুয়াইলাইটটা থেকে গিয়ে আমার কি হচ্ছে, সে সময়টা সানসেট, সূর্যাস্ত হয়। সূর্যাস্তের পরে কি হয়, ডন, সকাল আসে। আমরা সব সেই সকালে সেই উষার আলোর প্রত্যাশায় কাজ করে যাচ্ছি, কাজ করব, এবং এটাই হোক আমাদের প্রত্যয়। আর সবসময় মনে করি এই কথাটা আমার দাদু বলতেন, deeper the night, nearer the dawn, there is a saturating point, এবং সবসময় উষার আলো আসবে, যা বাংলাদেশ প্রধানমন্ত্রী আমাদের শেখ হাসিনা আলোকিত করে পৃথিবীতে দেখিয়ে দিয়েছেন রাইট কি, জাস্টিস কি, ডেমোক্রেসি কি। এটাই হোক আমাদের সকলের আশা। আজকে মার্চ মাস, স্বাধীনতার মাস। আমাদের মতো লোকদের একটু কঠিন, অনেক পরিবার স্বজন এই মাসে আমরা হারিয়েছি, ইনক্লুডিং মি। সকলের জন্য রইল আমার প্রাণ ঢালা সালাম, শ্রদ্ধা, এবং এত রক্ত যে মাটি মিশে তৈরি হয়েছে, সে মাটিতে কখনো অন্যায় প্রশ্রয় কখনোই হবে না। জয় হোক, জয় হোক। আমাদের সকল মানুষের শান্তি ফিরে আসুক, সকল মানুষ যেন তার রাইটস, তার ডিগনিটিটা নিয়ে যেন বাঁচতে পারে, সেটাই বাঁচছে, সেটা যেন আরো পারে। এ কথা বলেই আমি আমার কথা শেষ করছি। জয় বাংলা, জয় বঙ্গবন্ধু, বাংলাদেশ চিরজীবী হোক। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you, Honorable Member of the Parliament. তো আপনার সাথে আমরাও এক কণ্ঠে কণ্ঠ মিলাতে পারি, শ্রদ্ধা জানাতে পারি আমরা আমাদের 30 লক্ষ শহীদদের এবং বীর মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের, যাদের বিনিময়ে আমরা একটি স্বাধীন সার্বভৌম রাষ্ট্র পেয়েছি। We have come to the last segment, and I would certainly like to apologize for not having enough time for discussion, but nevertheless, we'll open the floor for discussion. I suggest that we take a few questions, queries, observation from the floor, and then we will also take questions from the participants online. I would request my colleagues who are monitoring and keeping a tab on the participants to open their mic and unmute them if that is muted, if they show their hand. So I would request first from the audience here, maybe 4 questions for observation, and then we will move on to the online. Huh? ঠিক আছে? Okay, now I've seen a number of hand raised, and I would start with the gentleman in black jacket. Apni nin ji, and then apniyo hat tulechhilen dujon, please.
At first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a question. Today, one of our today's honorable guests said that human rights are more expensive. My question is that what makes the human rights more expensive? What can be the relevant meaning of the word expensive here? I have slightly an unclearance about this statement. If there would be a little bit detailed discussion, it would be better. Thank you.
Thank you. May I also request, when you take the floor, to kindly introduce yourself very briefly.
I'm extremely sorry. I'm Raihan Ahmed, a student from University of Dhaka, Department of Sociology. Thank you.
Thank you. The next, the young lady at the back in blue sari, please, if you can hand over the mic to her, and please introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sumaya Tabassum Faiza. I'm a LLB undergrad, currently studying in North South University. So I have this question, and it is, in this 21st century, if we had to discover or recognize the human rights from scratch, I mean, if the human rights, we didn't recognize human rights in first. So if in this 21st century we had to recognize the human rights, would it be any different from the existing recognized one, or would it be the same? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we will take a couple of more questions. I'll take the question from the gentleman with the spectacles, glasses, and then come to the two young ladies here. Huh? So you will be next, and the last one from the floor would be another person. Yes, young man.
Thank you, sir. This is MD Marufur Rahman Khan from Department of Peace and Conflict Studies, University of Dhaka. My particular question is to Mr. Subhash Oste, sir. As you said, refugee rights is to human rights. What do you think? How much rights will be ensured towards Rohingya people in Bhasanchar on Government Ashran Project 3, as Human Rights Watch mentioned or marked it as prison? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings. I am Zubaida Hana Farooq, a master's program student in Dhaka University, Peace and Conflict Studies Department. I have two questions. One is particular to Huma, ma'am. In the last year G7 conference of the G7 countries, there was a communique from White House that Biden will be particularly working for the ensuring of human rights from across the world. But in the last 1 year, there has been one incident of military coup in Myanmar and a very known incident of Rohingya refugee influx in Bangladesh. But in neither cases, there was any intervention from United States or any other relevant big powers. So this anomaly between the statements of ensuring human rights and ensuring that you'll be protected and no activity in reality, how does that can assure the assurance of human rights across the world? And another question is to Mizanur Rahman, sir. There has been a few anomalies regarding when there was the justice of war criminals. There was some what I can say, there was কিছুই ছিল যে বাধা দেওয়া হয়েছিল যে অ্যামনেস্টি ইন্টারন্যাশনাল পক্ষ থেকে যে এই ধরনের যে রায়গুলো সেগুলো পাশ করা উচিত না। সো এই যে অ্যানোমালি যে while you are protecting the rights of justice of one person, you have to prohibit the right of life of another person. How this anomaly can be balanced? Thank you.
Thank you. The last question from the floor would be yes, ma'am.
I hope I'm audible. I'm Tasnim Nusrat Reza. I'm pursuing LLM from University of Dhaka. And my question is, right to self-determination is one of the rights that people across the world aspire to achieve. And Bangladesh is one of those countries that successfully achieved that right in 1971. Now that we address the issue of criminalization of digital expression, that relates to, associated with political opinion and religious opinion. So at this century, when we are criminalizing the digital expression, how does that uphold the essence of self-determination or the right to expression? Aren't they contradictory? That's what my question is. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions from our online participants, and thank you very much. As I see in the chat box, there are a couple of questions that have already been raised. One is from Salsabil Chaudhary, and if I may read out for you, regarding the enforcement of ESC rights. It had been observed in the Constituent Assembly debate that the enforcement and judicial recognition of such rights would be done by the future government. Has the time come in the 21st century for Bangladesh? I'm not very sure if I could answer, but perhaps the panelists would like to deal with this question. And the other question that I have is, how do you think the draft PTRC regulation for digital social media and OTT platforms may help combat sexual harassment? I think we have a full plate. We have got almost 7 interventions and questions, and I leave it to the panelists here to respond to these questions. From the extreme right, Madam Humar Khan. জি মাইক ভাই এখানেও এসে দিতে পারেন।
হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ, এক্সপান্সিভ মানে বিস্তৃত। হিউম্যান রাইটস এটা কিন্তু আসলে কোনো দেশের সীমা রাখা দ্বারা সীমাবদ্ধ না, এটা সারা বিশ্বে, মানে আমাদের এই যে জীবনের অধিকার এবং ডিগনিটির সাথে যে বেঁচে থাকার অধিকার, এটা সর্বজনীন, এটা কোনো সীমা রেখা দ্বারা সীমাবদ্ধ না, এই জন্যই এটা এক্সপান্সিভ। এক্সপেন্সিভ না, এক্সপান্সিভ।
তুমি শব্দটা ভুল করেছো, ইট ইজ নট এক্সপেন্সিভ, ইট ইজ এক্সপ্যান্সিভ, PANSIV। কেমন? ওই যার জন্য ভুলটা হয়েছে, কেমন? উনি বলছে যে ইটস এক্সপ্যান্সিভ, মিনিং ইটস ইউনিভার্সাল ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়াইড, ইটস নট এক্সপেন্সিভ। শোন, তোমার পকেটে চিন্তা করো না, কেমন? কোনো টাকা পয়সা খরচ করো।
Thank you, sir. I got it.
Thank you. Just to respond to a few questions, one that was specifically addressed to me. It's not for any one country or a leader to really ensure human rights till we look at it collectively. In fact, if we give that power to any one country, that it in itself becomes problematic, because all the nation states are equal in the charter and they should all bear equal responsibility. So looking up to one country, I think we should also change that attitude ourselves. And talking about the digital space, I think freedom of expression is not only Bangladesh is a party to ICCPR, and freedom of expression is very clearly enshrined in that covenant. So the regulation obviously is important of the digital space, but at the same time, ensuring the right to people to express themselves freely and responsibly. And that's what I said in my presentation, that necessarily putting people behind bars is not going to answer this problem. I think I wanted to address these two, and then I'll leave it to the rest.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let me just take a few questions. Number one, Tabassum from North South University. আজকে যদি আমরা মানবাধিকারের কথা বলতাম, ধারণা যদি আজকে সূচনা করতাম, তাহলে আমরা আবার স্ক্র্যাচ থেকে করতাম কিনা? নো। কেন নয়? বিকজ civilization depends on the inheritance that you get from predecessor generations, from those who lived before you. That's how the progress of humankind and civilization goes. আমরা যখন আজকে আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট একটা কথা বলেছেন 1689 জন লকের যে বিল অফ রাইটস এর কথা বলেছেন। বিল অফ রাইটস, হোয়াট আর দ্য বিলস? ম্যাগনা কার্টা 1215, ম্যাগনা কার্টা দ্য গ্রেট চার্টার অফ রাইটস। আর দ্য রিয়েলি রাইটস ফর দ্য কমন পিপল? নো, দে ওয়্যার রাইটস ফর দ্য ফিউ। সেখান থেকে আজকে আমরা আছি ইউনিভার্সালিটি অফ হিউম্যান রাইটসে চলে এসেছি। সো ইউ সি দ্যাটস বিন এ কলোসাল ডেভেলপমেন্ট ওভার দ্য ইয়ার্স। আজকে যদি আমরা শুরু করতাম, আমরা অনেক উপর থেকে শুরু করতাম। আগে শুরু করতে হচ্ছে অনেক আগে। আমাদের ফ্রেঞ্চ রেভলিউশনের পরে বলো ডিক্লারেশন অফ দ্য রাইটস অফ ম্যান, এবং উমেন শব্দটা কখনোই উচ্চারণ করা হয় নাই। আমাদের জেনারেল ক্লজেস অ্যাক্টে বলা হচ্ছে যে হি ইনক্লুডস শি। আমি যদি মাথা খাম যে হি ইনটু শি কি হবে হয় রে? হি বানান HE আর শি বানান SHE। আমি তো দেখেছি শি ইনক্লুডস হি, নট দ্য আদার ওয়েজ অ্যারাউন্ড। কিন্তু ওই আমার মতো ছেলেরা আইন করে লিখে দিয়েছে হি ইনক্লুডস শি। এখন ডক্টর শিরিন শারমিন চৌধুরী যদি পাল্টিয়ে দেন, তাহলে উইল বি ভেরি হ্যাপি যে শি ইনক্লুডস হি, এন্ড দ্যাট উইল বি মাচ মোর লজিক্যাল। সো ইটস আমাদের পরবর্তী জেনারেশনে কতটুকু আমরা করি সেটার উপর নির্ভর করে। শুধু অবভিয়াসলি উই উড স্টার্ট এ ডিপার্ট, দ্য ডিপার্টিং পয়েন্ট টু বি মাচ হায়ার দেন ইট ওয়াজ ব্যাক ইন 1215। ওয়ার ক্রাইমস ট্রাইব্যুনাল সম্পর্কে যে প্রশ্নটি করা হয়েছে, আমাদের ICTBD, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, other human rights defenders, Ambassador Stephen Rapp, অনেকে অনেক কথা বলেছেন। তাদের মেইন কনসেপ্টটা কি ছিল? তাদের মেইন কনসেপ্টটা ছিল যে তারা জানে খুব ভালো করেই যে নুরেমবার্গ যে ট্রায়ালটা হয়েছিল, টোকিও যে ট্রায়ালটা হয়েছিল, দ্যাট ওয়াজ টু এ গ্রেট এক্সটেন্ট ভিক্টরস জাস্টিস। হোয়াটএভার ইউ ডু, দ্যাটস ফাইনাল। আমাদের এখানে তারা প্রশ্নগুলো তুলেছে so that they can question the legitimacy of the trial of the of those accused of war crimes in 1971. So concernটা ছিল যে whether there is due process of law, whether there is fairness and justice, whether there is right to appeal, and whether there is right to judicial review. এবং all these options were incorporated into the ICDBD in the rules so that there is no question on fairness and justice and due process of law. এরপরও যদি কেউ কোয়েশ্চেন করে, then you can only say, wicked people, দুষ্ট লোকরা আছে, those who can engage the lobby, টাকা দিয়ে, জামাত শিবিরে টাকা আছে, টাকা দিয়ে কি হবে, you can question the legitimacy of the trial of the genocide of 1971. সুতরাং law is crystallized politics, my dear. সুতরাং আইনের ভেতরে রাজনীতি সবসময়ই আছে, and তোমাকে ঠিক করে নিতে হবে যে কোন রাজনীতি এবং রাজনৈতিক ধারা তুমি অবলম্বন করবে এবং পছন্দ করবে। That's whether you are pro-people or you are anti-people, whether you're pro-poor or anti-poor, whether you're pro-self-determination or you are anti-self-determination. So that is the choice that you can have. At the criminalization of digital expression, you see, this is a very critical issue and a very delicate issue. এখানে কিন্তু এক বাক্যে বলে দেওয়া যে this is what should be এবং এটা হওয়া উচিত নয়, this is very difficult. Something has to be left to the judiciary to interpret and come up with their observations in concrete situations. তবে একটা বোধহয় কথা আমরা বলতেই পারি যে if there is incitement to disorder, if there is incitement to the breach of law and order and peace in the society, obviously no society would probably accept that. No society is going to acquiesce that. Let me just give an example from 1899. In the Human's Claim, it was a case between France and the United States. There's a question, one French national, he, bursted a bomb in France and led to the death of a few of the soldiers, and he went and took refuge in England. And when his extradition was solicited, he said, hey, I am a member of a political party, and the political party was the anarchist party. So I am a member of that political party. So what I did is not a criminal offense. It was a political crime, and political offenses are excluded from extradition. But the court said, my dear friend, anarchists are anarchists. They are enemies to civilization and to all states. Similarly, if you are inciting incitement, you are an enemy. You are not supposed to live in the civilized society. Your liberty probably needs to be curtailed, and that's what the judiciary does. But obviously, one thing is sure, that it cannot be based only on subjective satisfaction of the decision maker. There has to be subjective plus objective indicators and grounds for satisfaction. Very lately, even the media, the social media like the Facebook, Instagram, what they did, anyone who is Russian, anyone leading to have any connections with Russia, you can kill them, you can hit them, you can assault them, even you can kill them if you come across a Russian. And this is being done by Facebook and Instagram openly. Is this what you want? So the question is very clear. There has to be a line of demarcation which you can never traverse and never cross. About the ESC rights, from the internet, probably someone about the ESC rights, whether it is the time is ripe enough for the government, for the state to recognize economic, social, cultural rights, not merely as fundamental principles of state policy, but as fundamental rights of the citizens of Bangladesh. Well, with very humbly, it's my very humble opinion. And but I probably, in front of the honorable speaker, the number one legislator in the country, I very humbly say it is probably long overdue that Bangladesh recognize at least some of the ESC rights as fundamental rights. If Nepal could do it, right to housing and education, if South Africa could do it in 1994, I think Bangladesh also, with the resources that we have, at least, and even without recognizing, the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is doing, right to education, right to housing. She is doing it already. So why not recognize it as fundamental human rights of the citizens of Bangladesh?
In some of the judgments given by the Supreme Court, the PIL litigations particularly, and where the explanation for right to life has come up, the scope defining and following the Indian jurisprudence on right to life, there are ample examples where socioeconomic rights are being recognized. And like, for instance, in an Indian case, in a hilly area where the people live on hills, right to having access road in the hill area has been recognized as part of right to life. It's a very special situation, an exceptional case, because those people otherwise, without having the access to road, cannot commute. They cannot go to collect their water. They cannot go to collect their food. They just will be confined within particular hill. So the court recognized that this will be part of right to life. Similarly, in some of the cases, these issues are coming up in Bangladesh also. And socioeconomic rights are being recognized in a way that it is being brought within the scope of civil and political rights like right to life. So it is being argued that right to life is not only a civil and political right, but the scope is much wider, and right to life is a right that ensures a quality of life, a life with human dignity. And that is my thesis, and I have argued that. So I have discussed and dealt with the challenges, the negative propositions that did not allow me to say that how can you do this? It will need resources, from where the state will get resources. But my arguments were that even in recognizing civil and political rights, you are engaging resources of the state. Because when you pass through the immigration in any airport, and in the name of security, the amount of checking that you have to go through, all the cameras, all the machineries that you have to cross, these don't come free. These are involving the resources of the state. So you cannot respect any right without resource. So there is a necessity for resource. So you cannot reject economic and social rights barely on the ground by saying that this requires resource, so we cannot provide. I think it is more logical that it depends on the ability of the state, রাষ্ট্রের অর্থনৈতিক সক্ষমতার সাথে এর মানে একটা নিবিড় যোগাযোগ আছে। কেননা আমাদের সংবিধানেও আমাদের এই একই প্লেজ যে আমরা একটা শোষণ মুক্ত, দারিদ্র্য মুক্ত দেশ, এবং যেখানে মানে বঞ্চিত মানুষের অধিকার প্রতিষ্ঠা। তো সেটা করতে হলে তো সোশ্যাল এন্ড ইকোনমিক রাইটস কে অবশ্যই প্রায়োরিটি দিতে হবে, এবং এটার জন্য 21st সেঞ্চুরি আমরা এখনো রেডি কিনা আমি মনে করি আমরা রেডি, আমরা বেশ আগে থেকে এটা করছি, এবং এটা হয়তো সামনের দিকে আরো বেশি করা হবে।
থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ। আপনাকে অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ মাননীয় স্পিকার এই ইন্টারজেকশনের জন্য। এবং এই এটাতে একটা জিনিস বোধহয় খুব আরো পরিষ্কার হচ্ছে যে আমরা খুব সিরিয়াসলি ওইদিকে এগোচ্ছি, যেখানে অর্থনৈতিক এবং সামাজিক যে অধিকারগুলো সেটাকে লেজিসলেট করা অ্যাটলিস্ট পর্যায়ক্রমে হলেও, হ্যাঁ, এবং আমাদের আর্থিক যে সক্ষমতা তৈরি হয়েছে সেখান থেকে তো আমরা নিশ্চয়ই মনে করি, এবং আপনার সাথে আমরা পূর্ণভাবে একমত যে সে সক্ষমতা আমাদের কাছে এসছে যে আমরা আমাদের নাগরিকদেরকে সে নিশ্চয়তাটা এবং অধিকারটা দিতে পারি। ধন্যবাদ মাননীয় স্পিকার আপনাকে। কাছে আমাদের আরো কিছু প্রশ্ন আছে, অনলাইনেও প্রশ্ন আছে। মিস্টার বুস্তি, would you like to respond? Maybe in a minute, a question specifically posed to you, if you would, and perhaps then we take a couple of more questions from online. Equity ensure করার জন্য তাদেরকে, and then perhaps we will have to wrap up if that is. Yeah. Mr. Booth.
Thank you, Ambassador Imtiaz. The question, if I understood correctly, was the rights of refugees on Basanjar Island. Well, as far as UNHCR is concerned, refugee rights do not change when refugees change locations. These are fundamental rights. And in the context of Basanjar, you may be aware that the United Nations, and on their behalf, the UNHCR, and the government of Bangladesh, on the latter's behalf, the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, have signed an MOU in October 2021, and that provides for policy framework for the cooperation between the United Nations and the government, and when I say United Nations, by extension also its partners. And that MOU ensures the ensuring of protection services, assistance, and unrelated matters, also for the Rohingya refugees who are relocated to the Basanjar Island. And the island, the project it's a government-led project, and UNHCR is there to support the government to make sure that refugees are able to enjoy their rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Although my intention was to take a few more questions, and if you indulge with, can we take up a few more questions both from our online participants, and then we'll open the floor. I have two questions I can see and read, and I'll read it out from the screen that I have in front of me. It's it is posed by Mr. Ahmed Raghib Chaudhary. Will the proliferation of human rights and rights to regulate state conduct be halted? The question I'm reading: will the proliferation of human rights to regulate state conduct be halted due to alleged gross violation of human rights and consequential humanitarian intervention being used by states to violate customary international law, principles of prohibition of use of force and non-intervention? For example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine on account of the alleged genocidal elements in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This is one question, perhaps very briefly, if you wish to respond. And the other is from Mr. I've read those two, from Asif Munir, and he would like to know, it would be good to mainstream human rights education and new technology in the society, both through formal and non-formal education. If time allows, perhaps now time is there. Would it be good to hear? It would be good to hear from Ms. Huma Khan and Professor Mizanur Rahman. So very two specific one. The questions I'd seek two more intervention or questions from the floor. There were several hands raised before. If you still have the questions or queries or observation, please do raise your hand. The gentleman there with জি আপনি নেবেন, তারপরে সামনে এখানে, হ্যাঁ, and then শেষটা 30 সেকেন্ডের মধ্যে আপনাদের প্রশ্নগুলো সারতে হবে। একেবারে পিছনে যিনি আছেন উনি, না ভাই আপনি না, ওই ভদ্রলোক, উনি আগেও তুলেছিলেন, আপনি শেষ, হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে, ছোট্ট করে আপনাদের প্রশ্নগুলো করুন। আপনি শুরু করুন আগে। লাল জামা পরে আছেন, ওনার বামে যিনি বসে আছেন। জি জি।
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Fastos Ikechukwuote, student, LLM, Dhaka University. Please, my question is specifically with respect to freedom of expression and self-determination and the rights of the transgender. I heard the last speaker do mention the third gender in Bangladesh and how the government of Bangladesh has recognized the rights of the transgender. But if you look at the recognition in practical realities, we discover that this recognition has not been carried out with corresponding rights. And beyond the fact that the rights of the transgender in concrete realities has not been really implemented apart from the legal recognition of giving them the right to vote and all that. You have the discordance of recognition and the criminal homosexual. How is it that on one hand, you recognize the right of the transgender, and the other hand, you still have the section 377, which criminalizes homosexual and sexual expressions. And then if you look at the neighbors of Bangladesh, for instance, India, Nepal, and Pakistan, you discover that section 377 has been decriminalized. People are free to express themselves however they want, provided they do not infringe on the rights of others. But we still have this section 377 alongside the legal recognition. In the 21st century, how do we recognize, reconcile this inconsistency in the human rights promotion in Bangladesh?
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Mustafa Hussain. I teach law at Bedrock University. So my question is like, when the crisis in Sudan or in Libya was arising, United Nations Security Council referred the matter to the International Criminal Court, stating that flagrant human rights is being violated, international crimes are committed. And that was the move ICC is still intervening. However, when the situation of Myanmar came into account, and in spite of having UN's own investigation reports that there are flagrant human rights violations, we see a different move from the end of United Nations, doing nothing at all. Rather, it is the OIC and Gambia who took the matter. And another perspective is that it was Bangladesh, because of being party to the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute, ICC got the venue to investigate on such matters. So in a world which is not objectively taking all the issues of violations with its objective criteria, how far we can argue the proper implementation of human rights, because it will remain as rhetoric. So I would expect that the panel will make their observations on this point. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question from the floor would be, the young man. Yes, you have the mic also.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving me the precise floor. I'm MD Toslim Bhuya Prantik, and I'm the student of law department at North South University. My question is that we saw many of attacks done by the first world country in 1945 or 1953 in China or Iran. It's called part of about invade. They did these kinds of, I think, okay. They did these kinds of invade. They mentioned that they are against of violation. They are against of humanitarian crisis, but still they are doing these kinds of a humanitarian crisis. And right now, what we can see when the first world country is taking one-sidedness of intervention, is precise amount of conflict. So how does in this particular century, we can reduce these kinds of one-sidedness to reduce these kinds of human right violating to minority people, or this is it? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we would okay. The last from Professor Dr. Mahfouz. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir, for the floor. So I would like to highlight just one thing that was raised by Ms. Huma Khan. So it's the human rights violation by the businesses. So in the name of growth, in the name of production, in the name of generating employment, so they are doing a lot of damages. They are, in fact, for example, if we consider the case of environmental damages, the climate change, the global climate change, where does it come from? So the businesses. So they are in fact not adopting the climate saving technologies. And also, if you see the fire hazards in different places, like in launches, in the factories, so they're not, they complying with the standards. So is there anything in the UN system, or is there anything in the international to in fact curb this kind of human rights violation?
Thank you, Dr. Mahfouz. I think with that, we have come to the end of the our discussion and questions part. I'm sure there are very interesting questions that has been raised in this round. And I'll again start with Mr. Wusti, if you would like to comment on the questions or observation made in this round. If not, then we can first request Professor Mizan. Sir, আপনি যদি বলেন and then finally
Sure.
we'll come to
Sure. So let me first refer to Mr. Asif Munir. আসিফ মুনির সাহেব নিজে কিন্তু উত্তর জানেন, কিন্তু আসিফ মুনির সাহেব তবু প্রশ্ন করার জন্য প্রশ্ন করেছেন। হি ইজ এ ভেরি নলেজেবল পারসন, এন্ড তবু উনি যেহেতু প্রশ্ন করেছেন, অবভিয়াসলি আই থিঙ্ক হুমা উড অ্যাগ্রি উইথ মি দ্যাট human rights education, this is something, it is a continuing education. We need to be educated and informed about the human rights developments time and again. And with the new technology being imparted, obviously the new technology, the social media, the internet, all these have changed lives so fundamentally that human rights is facing newer challenges with each day passing. And so these challenges need to be understood in the proper perspective, so that the technology, we do not become subservient to the technology, but technology be dominated and regulated by human soul. So in order to do that, probably we need training, we need education, we need awareness. With regard to the question raised by Mr. Raghib Chaudhary, you see, Article 2, Sub-Article 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, that's, I always consider it to be the, the basic norm of international law. This is the groomed norm in Hans Kelsen word of international law. So, non-use of force, but in respecting the territorial integrity of independent states, that is the fundamental basis of modern international law. But then again, the first example of humanitarian intervention, intervention per se is a violation of international law. However, the Indian intervention in Bangladesh in 1971, there's the first classical example of legitimate intervention, when a humanitarian intervention was given legitimacy and not questioned by any quarter in international law. Similar is the case, and you have very correctly pointed out to the latest development in Europe. The Russian, you use the word invasion in Ukraine, where Russia uses the word special military operation in Ukraine. And we cannot forget the past, that what led to this situation. The NATO and the West and Europe, the European Union especially, they totally neglected and ignored the tripartite international agreement known as the Minsk Agreement of 2012. Had that been complied with, then the situation would have been totally diluted and would not have reached the situation as it is today. But because of the non-compliance of that tripartite international Minsk Agreement and the genocidal acts of the ultra-nationalist forces in Ukraine, the Banderists and the Azovists in Donetsk and Luhansk, that we see that this intervention has been, and again, Russia is claiming that it's again humanitarian intervention. I think international law will debate on it, I think, in the future, and we'll see that whether this can get the recognition of another legitimate humanitarian intervention or not, but only time will show that. About the question raised by about the third gender, you see, my dear friend, this is a very delicate issue. But you see, law and life, they go together. And if law, precedes too much of the life, then there will be rupture, and there'll be tension, there will be conflict. There has to be a consistency between how life is going and how law is accommodating the changes in life. Today we are talking about third gender, but some 20 years back, this was taboo. I can challenge you that Bangladesh Institute of International Strategic Studies could not have organized any seminar where the rights of the third gender would have been discussed and debated here. But today, we're openly talking about third gender. They have been recognized by the country. They have recognition, the judicial recognition, as well as legal recognition in the country. However, if you are talking about sexual orientation and behavior of the individuals, that is something that has a very intricate relationship with the Islamic way of life and the religious way of life that is followed by the predominant, overwhelming majority of the people of this country. And that is something that no government, no state would venture to immediately do something which goes against the religious sentiments of the overwhelming majority of the people. It's a very delicate situation. I think you need time, and time is the best healer. Time will give answer at the right period of time. About in the U.S. recognition of, you see, about the Myanmar and the genocide that has been talked about, I couldn't really follow the full question, but just think of one thing, that the other day, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, he, through his words, United States for the first time recognized that there had been genocide committed against the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar by the military junta. For the first time, United States has recorded the recognition, which we have been claiming, that there is genocide. It is there, for which went to the International Court of Justice. And now USA all of a sudden decide to recognize. Why? Because USA needs very direly support of Bangladesh in its own sort, in its strategy that is being followed in Europe and others. Otherwise, it is again probably, Aromadi, the twilight of US leadership in the world. The world is entering into a new international order, and probably we'll be seeing new leaders in the world tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, and one last thing about Dr. Mahfouz's question. Well, Mahfouz, you talked about the corporate social responsibility. Fine. The businesses, businesses are there to make profit. That's the leitmotif of capitalism. And if businesses flourish, the workers there, there's a trickling effect that falls down upon the workers, and their standard of living also improves. Obviously, there is a huge way of exploitation of the workers there. I'm not going into that discourse, but taking the advantage of the presence of the chair of the National Human Rights Commission. While we were in the commission with Aromadi, we coined the word that let us not call it corporate social responsibility. Let us call it corporate human rights responsibility. So I would just urge that let us emphasize that this is corporate human rights responsibility, and they must sort of identify and make allotment so that the human rights works could be done, by the corporate world also.
Thank you. Ms. Khan.
Thank you. Just to explain regarding business and human rights, there are guiding principles that are recognized, that are developed by United Nations, endorsed by a number of member states, which the countries choose to subscribe to, and we also encourage businesses to subscribe to them. So we have this system of Global Compact, which you may be familiar with, and we work on encouraging and supporting the businesses. We also take it, once they sign the pledge, it is similar to what happens to member states. So if a company signs the pledge and they are accused of certain violations, we have the right to take them to the court, and also first to address it to them through the international human rights mechanisms. However, the pledge is still a voluntary pledge, so we have to motivate the corporates to subscribe to that. And if you are interested, please, I will send you the invitation to attend the South Asia Business and Human Rights Forum in Bangladesh from 28th to 30th March. You may find some sessions interesting. It's online and offline, so you may enjoy that and perhaps can think of more strategies to work together. One last thing I wanted to say on Ukraine, that remember, this is not the first allegation of genocide in the last decade. We have allegations in Syria, we have allegations in Myanmar. So I don't think because it's happening in Europe, it will change the world or change the international human rights law. If it happens in Africa and Asia, then we also don't react the same way, the way we start reacting to Europe. So we also have to change our attitudes, and should not look to only United States to take up these questions. And I'm very happy that in the case of Myanmar, it was the Global South that took the step. So we should also take pride in what we can do as Global South and be more united as the Global North becomes when there is an infringement on their profits or benefits. I would like to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I would not dare try to summarize or the thoughts and the rich discussion that had taken place, and a very rich set of questions and answers that has been made. I would also just like to apologize our participants online whom I could not give the floor or take their questions, but I certainly can say that this has been a very enriching session. And we have been certainly enriched and honored by the presence of none other than the speaker, Honorable Speaker of the Bangladesh Jatiya সংসদ. Madam Speaker, again, on behalf of the Institute, on behalf of my colleagues, on behalf of everyone in this hall, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks for your kind presence and sitting through this entire session. This has been an inspirational session and interesting to say the least, and very informative and educative. At the same time, I would like to express our thanks on behalf of the Institute to Ms. Huma Khan, Professor Mizanur Rahman, Honorable Member of Parliament Aruma Dotto, Mr. Shuhash Rusti, for their kind presence, and then I finally also see our Director General and his team, who has worked tirelessly to make this event a successful one, seamlessly done, and my gratitude and thanks also goes to our chairperson of our National Human Rights Commission, and Madam, your presence has been an inspiration for us in this session, and many students of international law and law and international relations have been here, and they have immensely benefited from our interaction. I'm again thank you for your kind presence, and would like to invite you to join us for a modest meal. Thank you very much.